Hello, let me know where you're from in the world and what time it is after liking this video. Something's wrong with the kid I babysat. His toy bear smiled at me. Some jobs aren't worth the money. Some jobs take more from you than they give. I learned that the hard way. At the time, I was desperate. College tuition was draining my bank account faster than I could keep up, and my part-time job barely covered food and rent. Every time I checked my balance, it felt like a punch to the gut. Bills kept piling up, and no matter how many extra shifts I picked up, I was always falling behind. I needed a side job, fast, something easy, quick, and preferably well-paying. No complicated interviews, no weeks of waiting for a paycheck, just instant cash. That's when I stumbled upon the ad. Wanted. Babysitter for one night. Pays $500. Must follow instructions carefully. $500 for a single night? That was insane. Too good to be true, really. Babysitting usually paid what, $15 an hour at best? My first instinct told me there had to be a catch. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was some kind of scam. But then I thought about my empty fridge, my overdue internet bill, and the fact that I had about $20 to my name. I wasn't in a position to be picky. Without overthinking it, I grabbed my phone and dialed the number listed in the ad. The phone barely rang twice before someone picked up. A woman. Her voice was cold, distant, completely void of warmth, like she was reading off a script. Be here by 7 p.m. sharp. No guests, no phone calls. She said. I opened my mouth to respond, to ask any of the 100 questions running through my mind. But the line went dead before I could get a single word out. No introduction, no small talk, nothing. Just an address and a set of rules. That should have been my first red flag. Who hires a total stranger without even asking basic questions? No, do you have experience? No, have you worked with kids before? Just instructions. But $500 for a few hours of babysitting? No way was I passing that up. I drove to the house and arrived. The house was massive, not just big, mansion big. It stood at the very end of a long, deserted road, surrounded by nothing but empty land and thick, shadowy trees. No neighbors, no streetlights, just a cracked, lonely pavement leading up to an eerie, towering house. A single porch light flickered weakly, barely illuminating the front door. The whole place looked straight out of one of those horror movies I usually avoided. Something about it made me hesitate. The silence, the stillness, the way the windows loomed like dark, empty eyes. I took a breath, shaking off the creeping unease, and walked up the steps. My knuckles barely brushed against the wood when the door creaked open, like someone had been standing behind it, waiting for me. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, painfully thin, with sharp features that made his hollowed-out face look even more severe. Deep, dark circles pooled under his sunken eyes, like he hadn't slept in weeks, maybe months. Despite his exhaustion, his suit was crisp, perfectly pressed, not a wrinkle in sight. Behind him, a woman hovered stiffly, her posture so rigid she looked like she might shatter. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles bone white, like she was holding on to something for dear life. The man's gaze locked onto mine. His voice was flat, mechanical. "You're the babysitter?" I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Yeah." The woman stepped forward before I could say anything else and shoved a folded piece of paper into my hand. "These are the instructions." I glanced down at it, but didn't open it yet. Something about their urgency made my stomach twist. So, where's the kid?" I asked, forcing a small smile. Neither of them answered. The woman didn't even blink. She just turned on her heel, grabbed her coat, and started toward the door. "We'll be back by sunrise," she said quickly. "Follow the rules and you'll be fine." And then, before I could ask anything else, they were gone. The door shut behind them with a quiet but firm click. I stood there for a long moment, gripping the piece of paper in my hand, my unease growing by the second. Why had they left so quickly? Why did this whole thing feel wrong? Finally, I looked down at the list. The paper was old, slightly crumpled, and covered in tight, neat handwriting, each letter carefully formed. as if someone had taken painstaking effort to make sure every word was clear. It wasn't printed, no official babysitting instructions, just a handwritten list. It wasn't rushed or scribbled. It was deliberate, like whoever wrote it needed me to understand. My eyes skimmed over the rules, my stomach twisting with each one. Rule number 1, put Timmy to bed by 8:30 p.m. If he asks for a bedtime story, only read from the green book on his shelf. Do not read any other book aloud. Okay, strict, but fine. Maybe it was a sentimental book or something. Rule number 2, lock all doors and windows before 9 p.m. If you hear scratching at the back door, do not investigate. I blinked. What? That was weird. Why would there be scratching? A raccoon? A stray cat? Rule number 3, do not answer the phone after 11 p.m. My pulse quickened. Why? Who would be calling? And why would I need to ignore it? Rule number 4, if Timmy tells you someone is outside his window, do not look. Tell him, go to sleep, Timmy. Do not say anything else. Okay. Number that was officially creepy. Rule number 5, if you hear footsteps upstairs while Timmy is asleep, ignore them. Whatever you do, do not go upstairs. A lump formed in my throat. Footsteps? But there shouldn't be anyone else in the house. Rule number 6, at 11:33 p.m., the kitchen door will open on its own. Do not close it. Do not look inside. Let it remain open until 11:42 p.m. My hands felt clammy. I wiped them on my jeans. Rule number 7, if you hear a child giggling from the second floor, ignore it. The boy you are babysitting is asleep. I swallowed hard. My eyes darted back to the top of the list, rereading every rule, hoping maybe I had misunderstood something. But the words were still there, clear as day. Rule number 8, if you wake up on the couch and don't remember falling asleep, leave the house immediately. Do not look back. I let out a nervous laugh, a dry, humorless sound. This had to be a joke, right? A prank? Maybe the parents were just messing with me. Some weird rich people humor I didn't understand. Then I heard a voice. Are you my new babysitter? I jumped, my heart slamming into my ribs as I spun around. A little boy stood at the bottom of the staircase, staring at me with wide, tired eyes. He couldn't have been older than 6. His blonde hair was messy, sticking up in different directions like he'd been tossing and turning in bed. He wore pajamas, soft blue ones covered in tiny stars. I forced a smile, trying to steady my breathing. Yeah, you must be Timmy. He nodded. Did my mom give you the rules? He asked. Something about the way he asked sent a chill up my spine. His tone wasn't casual or curious. It was serious. My stomach twisted. Yeah. His expression darkened. His small fingers tightened on the banister. You have to follow them. I stared at him, unable to respond. His voice was quiet, but there was a weight behind it, something heavy, something that made my skin crawl. I shook off the unease, forcing myself to focus. It was just a kid, just a weird set of rules. Nothing was going to happen. I led Timmy upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. His room was small and tidy, with a little twin bed and a row of stuffed animals lined up against the wall. Everything was neatly arranged, like it hadn't been touched in a while. As I pulled the blanket over him, he whispered, "Don't forget to lock the doors and windows." I nodded quickly, not wanting to show my discomfort. "I won't. Get some sleep, okay?" He didn't answer. He studied my face for a moment, like he was trying to decide if he could trust me. Then finally just turned over, hugging a stuffed bear to his chest, and he closed his eyes. As soon as his breathing evened out, I left the room and made my way through the house, double-checking every door, every window. The locks clicked into place one by one, until I was sure everything was secure. I had just finished locking the back door when I heard it. A faint scratching. I froze. The sound was soft but deliberate. A slow, dragging scrape, like fingernails running over the wood. My breath caught in my throat. A cold chill ran down my spine as my eyes flicked toward the paper still clutched in my hand. Rule number 2. If you hear scratching at the back door, do not investigate. My throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to look, to check, just to make sure it wasn't, I don't know, a tree branch or an animal. But something deep inside me knew better. I squeezed my eyes shut, my pulse hammering in my ears. Just walk away. Ignore it. It's nothing. Slowly, I forced my legs to move, stepping away from the door. The scratching continued behind me, steady and patient, as if whatever was out there knew I was listening. Minutes passed. The scratching continued, slow and rhythmic, until finally, it stopped. I let out a shaky breath. I spent the next hour glued to my phone, scrolling through social media mindlessly, trying to drown out the silence. But the quiet was suffocating. The whole house felt wrong, too still, too heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every creak, every shift in the floorboards made my heart pound. I forced myself to check the clock. Then at exactly 11 p.m., the house phone rang. I froze. I jolted so hard my phone nearly slipped from my hands. The old landline sat on the wall near the kitchen. Its shrill, piercing ring shattered the silence, echoing through the dimly lit living room, sharp and unrelenting. My breath hitched. Rule number 3. Do not answer the phone after 11 p.m. I turned my head slowly, my gaze landing on the old-fashioned phone sitting on the small table across the room. I stared at it, my pulse pounding in my ears. The ringing didn't stop. It just kept going, over and over, like whoever was on the other end wasn't going to give up. The ringing was insistent, demanding, like it knew I was here. It rang again, and again, and again. I turned my back to it, gripping my phone in my hands, trying to ignore it. Just a few more seconds, and it would stop. Each ring made my stomach clench tighter. My fingers twitched. My breathing came fast and shallow. What would happen if I answered? Who would be on the other end? I squeezed my hands into fists, my nails digging into my palms. Ignore it. Just ignore it. Seconds dragged on like hours. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the ringing cut off. Silence. I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to relax. But just as my shoulders sagged, "Miss?" My stomach plummeted. I spun around so fast my vision blurred. Timmy stood at the bottom of the staircase. His small hands gripped the railing tightly, his knuckles white, his eyes wide with fear. His face was pale, his lower lip trembling. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "There's someone outside my window." My blood ran cold. Rule number 4 flashed in my mind. If Timmy tells you someone is outside his window, do not look. Tell him, "Go to sleep, Timmy." Do not say anything else. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. "It's okay, Timmy. Go to sleep." Timmy didn't move right away. His small fingers gripped the banister, knuckles turning pale. His lip quivered as he shifted on his feet. But he's staring at me. A chill spread through my body, icy and slow. My instincts screamed at me to run upstairs, to check, to look, but I knew I couldn't. The rules were clear. I forced a weak smile, even though my hands were shaking. "Go to sleep, Timmy." His wide eyes flicked toward the hallway, and for a second I thought he was going to argue. His little body trembled, a quiet fear radiating from him like static electricity. But then slowly he nodded. Without another word, he turned and padded back toward his room. He climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to his chin. Then, Timmy asked suddenly, "Are you scared?" My breath caught. I turned my head slowly, my heart hammering in my ears. Timmy was still sitting upright in bed. He shouldn't have been. I had just tucked him in, just watched him lay down. But there he was, sitting silently, watching me. His pale face seemed even paler under the dim glow of his nightlight. He was small for his age, fragile-looking, with dark circles under his eyes. I forced out a short, nervous chuckle. "Of what?" Timmy didn't blink. He didn't answer. Instead, in a quiet, almost pleading voice, he whispered, "Don't close the kitchen door." A cold, twisting fear coiled in my stomach. I pressed my lips together and nodded. Okay. I left his room and shut the door behind me, firm but gentle, careful not to make a sound. I could still feel his gaze, burning into my back. I didn't check the window. I couldn't check the window. My legs carried me downstairs on autopilot, though every step felt heavier, harder to take. I tried to shake off the nerves, tried to convince myself this was all in my head. I was trying to calm the wild pounding in my chest, just make it through the night. The rules were just weird rules, right? The parents were strict, maybe paranoid. Maybe they had a reason for all of this. Maybe I was just overthinking. I settled onto the couch, wrapping a blanket around myself, my hands clenched tight in the fabric. I glanced at the clock, 11:32 p.m. My stomach twisted. My fingers gripped the blanket tighter. And then, 11:33 p.m. A long, low creak echoed through the house. My body went rigid. The kitchen door swung open. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. A deep, suffocating darkness seeped out from the doorway, too dark, stretching like ink bleeding into the air. The doorway itself looked wrong somehow, like it was pulling further away, stretching longer than it should have been. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't look inside. Let it remain open until 11:42 p.m. I fumbled for my phone with shaking fingers. The screen glowed in the darkness. 7 minutes left. That was all. 7 minutes. Just wait. Just sit still. Then, from the darkness, I heard breathing. Not mine. Not Timmy's. Something else. It was deep and slow, a wet, rasping inhale, followed by an even slower exhale. I pressed my back against the couch, my nails digging into my palms. My whole body was tense, every muscle locked in place. The breathing got louder, closer, so close I could almost feel it against my skin. A shudder crawled up my spine. My phone screen flickered. 11:41 p.m. Almost there, just one more minute. The breath hitched, like it was shifting, moving. The clock finally struck 11:42 p.m. The sound stopped. I opened my eyes and looked. The kitchen door was closed. My chest heaved as I sucked in a shaky breath. My lungs burned, like I'd been holding it in for too long. My fingers, still clenched into fists, slowly unfurled, the movement stiff and reluctant. When I glanced down, my palms were marked with deep, crescent-shaped indentations where my nails had dug in too deep. A sharp sting ran through them, but I barely registered the pain. It was over, for now. I checked the time again, 11:43 p.m. The house was silent, but not in a peaceful way. It wasn't the kind of quiet that brought relief. It was the kind that pressed down on you, thick and suffocating, like something unseen was still there, lurking just beyond sight, watching, waiting. I stayed on the couch, refusing to move. My body was still coiled tight, my muscles aching from the tension. I tried to focus on my breathing, to slow my racing pulse, to convince myself that everything was fine. But my heart barely had time to slow before I heard a child's giggle. The sound came from upstairs. I went completely still. My eyes darted to the baby monitor on the coffee table. The small screen showed Timmy's bed. He was there, asleep, not moving. The giggling got louder. It wasn't him. My throat tightened. Rule number 6. If you hear a child giggling from the second floor, ignore it. The boy you are babysitting is asleep. I clenched my hands into fists, nails biting into my skin. Ignore it. Just ignore it. The giggling stopped. For a moment, the house was silent again. Then, from behind the couch, a whisper came. "You're no fun." A cold rush of terror flooded my veins. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stayed perfectly still, my body locked in place, waiting. The silence stretched on. I sat there frozen, until the house felt normal again. I exhaled shakily, barely realizing I'd been holding my breath. My chest ached. my muscles weak from how tense I had been. I forced myself to check the clock, my body sagging in relief. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt. See? Nothing happened. I followed the rules and nothing happened. Everything was fine. And then I heard soft footsteps. Upstairs. I went rigid. I was on the couch. Timmy was asleep in his room. I had checked. I had seen him. But I could hear them. Slow, deliberate, measured steps pressing against the wooden floor above me, moving with an eerie patience. I gripped the armrest, my fingers digging into the fabric. Rule number 5. If you hear footsteps upstairs while Timmy is asleep, ignore them. Do not go upstairs. I squeezed my eyes shut, breathing through my nose. Ignore it. It's just noise. Just a house settling. I clamped a hand over my mouth, choking back the instinct to scream. Ignore it. Just ignore it. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my back harder into the couch, as if that would somehow shield me from whatever was up there. My whole body trembled, a cold sweat slicking my skin. The footsteps didn't stop. They moved again, slow, deliberate, pacing, back and forth, just above me. My mind raced. Who, or what, was up there? Number. It didn't matter. I wasn't going to find out. A floorboard creaked. The steps were moving. Down the hall. Toward Timmy's room. A sharp, icy panic tore through my chest. I wanted to run, to throw open his door and grab him, but I couldn't. The rules. Follow the rules. Then I heard a whisper. Miss, why didn't you listen? A shudder rippled through me. My vision blurred. My chest ached, like the air was too thick, too heavy. My fingers trembled as I rubbed my eyes. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I kept my eyes shut tight, forcing myself to block out the sound. Don't react. Don't acknowledge it. Seconds dragged into minutes, each one stretching unbearably long. And then, the footsteps stopped. Silence. Darkness swallowed me whole. The dizziness hit me hard, like something had sucked all the energy from my body in an instant. For a moment, maybe longer, I was weightless, drifting in a void of nothingness. There was no sound, no sensation. Just an endless, suffocating emptiness. My mind felt disconnected from my body, like I was floating in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. My head swam, my limbs felt weak, and then I collapsed. The world faded to black. I don't remember dreaming. I don't remember anything at all. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was waking up. In Timmy's bed. My entire body turned to ice. The sheets beneath me were soft. The air smelled faintly of dust and something stale. Wrong. I bolted upright, my pulse slamming against my ribs. No, no, no. Rule number 7. If you wake up somewhere other than the couch, immediately leave the house without looking behind you. I sat up, frozen, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gulps. The air around me felt thick, heavy, pressing down on my shoulders. I couldn't hear anything. No wind, no cars outside. Just a deep, swallowing silence. The mattress dipped. Suddenly, from the darkness behind me, a voice whispered, "Emily, where are you going?" Something was in bed with me. A cold sweat broke across my skin. I did not turn around. I forced my body to move, inch by inch. My hands trembled as I pushed the blanket off. My feet touched the cold floor. Behind me, the presence shifted. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Don't run, don't panic. And my decision was already made. I was leaving. Not just this house. Not just this job. This town. I packed what little I had, stuffing my bag with trembling hands. No goodbyes. No explanations. I didn't want to explain. Because I didn't understand. And worse, I didn't want to. I stood. I walked forward. I kept my head down as I stepped outside. The floor creaked under my steps. Behind me, footsteps followed. Software. Slow. Playful. I reached the hallway. The footsteps quickened. A breath, cold and damp, brushed the back of my neck. I ran. I hit the stairs, skipping steps, my legs burning as I pushed forward. The footsteps behind me pounded faster, matching my speed. I reached the front door, my fingers scrambling over the lock. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my keys. I yanked the door open. The cold night air hit me like a wave. I sprinted outside, my heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't stop, not until I reached my car. Only then did I turn back, gasping for breath, my hands still shaking. The house was dark, the front door still wide open. Something stood in the doorway, watching, waiting. I didn't stay to find out what. The next morning, as I looked at my purse, I noticed Timmy's bear inside my bag. I had to return it no matter what. I couldn't keep it. My hands still trembled as I dialed the number from the babysitting ad. It rang once, twice. Then, someone picked up. A man's voice, not the father's, not the mother's. "This is Officer Daniels." I hesitated. I was trying to reach the family that lives at... I gave him the address, my voice unsteady. Silence. Then, in a careful, measured voice, the officer asked, "Who are you trying to reach?" I told him the couple's names. Another long pause. A cold, sinking dread settled in my stomach. Then finally the officer spoke. His voice was quiet, cautious. "That house has been abandoned for 20 years. My mouth went dry. "No," I whispered. "I was there. I babysat their son." The line was silent for so long that I thought we had been disconnected. Then the officer exhaled, a slow, careful breath. "There was a little boy that lived there once." I gripped my phone tighter. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. The officer's voice was barely above a whisper. "But he died in 2003. The call cut off. I stared at my phone, my chest rising and falling too fast. Then I felt it, a shift in the air, the tiny creeping sensation of being watched. Slowly, stiffly, I turned my head. I looked at the bear. It wasn't the same anymore. Then I swear, I saw it smiling at me. "Don't let them in." Addiction took our mother slowly, rocked her through it, and sung her to sleep, sunk deep into the mattress on her bed. When her back teeth fell out, she left them on the side of the bathtub. I was 7, and I kept them in a matchbox, the missing pieces of her kept safe so she wouldn't be lost forever. So maybe one day we could put her back together. Our house fell down around us, and we tried our best to raise ourselves. The ceilings had water damage, and the bottom stairs had dry rot, and in the winters the radiators would bleed rust. But it was still our house, and Annie made it a home. My sister Annie mothered me, with lopsided band-aids on bruised knees and lukewarm microwave meals. She told me ghost stories and didn't mind when I crawled into her bed later on, too scared to sleep alone. She taught me to dance, barefoot on the living room carpet, music channel on full volume on the TV, shaking our hips before they were fully grown. She always let me shower first so the water was hot, never complaining when she had to make do with cold. She brushed my hair every day before school, even when I screamed and hit her when she caught the tangles. Annie was dark-haired like her father, whoever he had been, but I was blonde. Annie was desperate to be blonde too, like Marilyn Monroe, like Mom. I think she thought it would make them closer, remind Mom less of her dad. I'd give anything for her to have her hands in my hair one more time, even if it hurt. She moved to New York when I turned 18 and never came back. I still dream about her sometimes. Keeping up with our mother was impossible, and we learned from a young age we would always be left behind. It didn't make it any easier. When she was drinking light, she shone, would wake us up at 3 a.m. with pancakes, dripping in cherry syrup. Sometimes when the weather was right, and she'd had enough being drunk alone, she would call our school up and tell them we had both come down with summer sickness, and we'd drive to the beach instead. I remember being 9 years old in the back seat of the car coming home after one of our ocean days, sucking the salt from my fingers. Annie had just dyed her hair blonde, her best friend Jane helping her bend over our kitchen sink. From behind, I couldn't tell who was mother and who was daughter, radio up and windows down blowing the sky inside. When she was drinking heavy, she'd be out all night, hair piled up like a beauty queen, eyes glazed over and ringed with glitter and black. Sometimes she'd be gone a day or two. She would never tell us when. One day we'd just wake up to an empty house and the fridge packed full. Post-it note on the front with a smear of Mom's lipstick and the outline of a kiss, telling us she'd be back soon. Sometimes she'd bring guys home, filling the table with beer cans and ashtrays, smoke up to the ceiling, Mom lost in the haze. We'd sleep with pillows over our heads, trying to drown out the music they would blast until the AM, and wake up to strangers at our kitchen table in the morning, asking us where we kept the coffee. When Mom drank too little, she fell apart. She wouldn't buy food, refrigerator a gaping hole in the wall. She'd chain smoke, leaving cigarette burns on the wallpaper up by the stairs like the walls were sick and decaying. She barely slept, walking around with blue half-moons under her eyes, knuckles raw. She would scream at the slightest thing. I remember once when I spilled a glass of juice on the couch. She looked over at me with dead eyes and dragged me off onto the carpet and then took every single cushion off the couch and into the backyard and set them on fire. Annie went to watch a while from the window and then sat next to me on the floor, backs pressed against the skeleton of the seats, head resting in the crater of my collarbones. When Mom drank too much was the worst. She'd laugh too loud and too long at anything and everything, until her mouth started to shake and she started crying, at the breakfast table into her cereal. Annie shut down when Mom was like this, went somewhere deep inside herself where nobody could hurt her. She'd stay up until the morning watching old black and white movies on TV, whispering the lines she knew by heart like prayers. When I was 5, I'd cry when I'd find Mom passed out cold on her bed, sure she would never wake up. Annie would wipe my tears, tell me she was only sleeping just like the princesses in my storybook. We'd sit on Mom's bed together and wait for her to wake up. When we were older, I was the one who would pick Mom up off the bathroom floor again and again, and Annie would put her to bed, smoothing her hair off her face and the vomit from her mouth, changing her clothes if she'd pissed herself. Watching them then, there was no doubt that Annie was the mother now. It was October, and I was 13, Annie 16. It was a Wednesday night and Mom had been gone for 2 days. She'd called us that morning from a payphone, voice slurring down the line, telling us she was having the best time with all her new friends, hoped we were doing fine. When she asked me if I was having a good birthday, I hung up on her. My birthday had been the day before. Annie had given me a pile of presents, strawberry lip glosses and glittery nail polishes. I didn't ask where she'd got the money for them. I didn't care. We'd taken the bus to the beach with Jane, eaten the birthday cake she had made for me, sand getting into the frosting. It tasted like sweetness in the sea, and I savored every bite and scrape of sugar against my teeth. We watched the sun go down, Annie snapping grainy photos on her shitty Nokia as I blew out my candles, wishing over and over that Mom wouldn't come home, that she'd just stay gone this time. But that Wednesday night, me and Annie weren't speaking. Anger hung heavy between us, seeping through the floorboards. It began when she tripped at the bottom of the stairs. We'd both laughed, Annie throwing her head back, gap between her front teeth catching the light. When I'd bent to pick her up, I'd caught her breath, warm against the freckles on my cheeks. I let go of her arms and she fell again, hitting the floor and grinning, shaking her hair from her face. Her breath was heavy with whiskey. I couldn't start picking her up too, couldn't watch her fall again and again. Just like Mom, I knew she'd never get back up. I'd stared down at her, blonde hair fallen into her eyes, and all I could see was our mother. And then I was running, feet slamming the hallway like heartbeats turned loose. I'd run for the kitchen and tipped every bottle we had down the sink, shoving Annie back as she fought to stop me, catching liquor on her fingers as it fell. She grabbed my shoulders and made me drop the very last bottle. It smashed between us on the floor, glass shards shining like we'd dragged the stars out of the sky and broken them, pieces we could never put back. Outside, through the open windows, the sky turned pale gold, clouds a mess of pink and cream smeared across the horizon. I cried then, watching Annie on her knees picking up the pieces. That was Annie, always trying to fix things even when it was too late. The smell of food dragged me from my room, stomach turning traitor inside my ribcage. Annie was cooking pasta, real food not made in a microwave. She'd set the table, Tammy Wynette singing softly from the CD player, Annie gently swaying her hips as she stirred the tomato sauce, rich and warm. As we ate in silence, with every bite I forgave her. Mom never cooked dinner, or remembered my favorite was spaghetti ever since I was a kid, or stayed sober long enough to sit up at a table. Annie wasn't Mom. We were washing the dishes when we first heard it. A moth was crawling down the inside of the pane, and I cracked the window to let it out into the dark. From the backyard came a faint sound. I tilted my head to listen as it was coming from far off, crying. I figured it was Mika, the 2-year-old next door, having a tantrum loud enough for us to catch, or maybe even Lucky Strike, the cat that junkies down the street, begging for food like he sometimes did. I always wanted to feed him when he came around, winding over my ankles, but Annie always stopped me, saying once you started giving, they never stopped taking. Looking back, I don't think she was talking about the cat. Annie flipped the Christmas lights strung up around the porch, and we sat on the plastic beach chairs watching the skies. When we were little, we'd sit outside, and Annie would tell me the names of all the constellations and the stories of how they came to be hung up in the night sky. I had to grow up before I realized she made them all up as she went along. It was a game we still like to play now, making up ridiculous stories for the shapes we could pick out. Ah, yes, that one there is the Coors Light. It got there when God dropped it out of his convertible window and never picked it up, she said, nodding sagely and hiding her smile. Of course, I said, waving my hands and pointing up past the power lines, right next to the ashtray, left there by angels on a smoke break. Yeah, they say if you wish on it, all your dreams will come true, said Annie, grinning. She stopped laughing, voice quieter, face tilted up to all those dead stars. Let's wish, Emmy. Let's wish. So we did. The sound of crying interrupted us. It was closer this time, and definitely human. We turned to each other, confused. Annie shrugged, and I squinted out into the black. It sounded like a baby, lost and tired and alone. It must be Mika, I said, slowly getting to my feet. Maybe he walked around the back. Shit, do you want to call Connie and tell her we'll bring him over? Annie didn't reply, and I sighed, rolling my eyes. Guess I'll do everything then. I stepped off the porch, grass soft against my heels. The air smelled like it might rain, fresh and clean and growing. A promise unfulfilled. Annie's voice was strained. I turned to her, smiling. It died on my face when I saw the look on her own. Get inside now. She was staring out into the dark, past me, opening the door with one hand behind her, fingers fumbling on the catch. I froze, barefoot in the dirt. I'd found what she was looking at. In the bushes by the back fence was a person, crouched with their knees tucked up neat under the chin, arms wrapped around legs. Their mouth hung wide, softly opening and closing as he cried. Like a child, lost in the dark. Not like a child, but as someone pretending. Mimicking the sound, open and closed out in the blackness. Suddenly they straightened, snapping upright face still hidden by the black. They were tall and thin, too thin to be a normal person. Panic made me move, animal instincts left over from the days we lived up in the trees carrying me forward. I was faster than Annie, dragging her inside and slamming the door behind us, hearing it bounce on its hinges as I locked it. We watched as the person slowly walked towards the house, steps deliberate and long. Annie reached for my hand, holding me tight, and turned me to face her, holding my shoulders. Don't turn around, Emmy. Don't turn around. Instinctively, I started to look over my shoulder out into the darkness. Annie grabbed my face hard and shook her head. I knew then she was serious. Her voice cracked, and she cleared her throat, gripping my hand tight enough to hurt, nails digging in, grounding herself. I looked down at our fingers interlocked, both of us grown from the same bones. I'm going to call the cops and everything is going to be... Her voice faltered, stuttering. Tears spilled over her lashes, dripping like the promise of rain. Annie never cried. Your phone's on the porch, she whispered, and bile crawled its way up my throat. Her phone was upstairs, charging. A soft tap-tap-tapping filled the silence. Annie turned to the window, eye whites showing her eyes were so wide, It was the sound of someone's forehead against the glass, slowly, over and over. They started to speed up, faster and harder, skin meeting glass until they was slamming into the window hard enough to shake the panes. The tapping stopped, and I was about to ask Annie if I could look now when she screamed, followed by the sound of cracking glass and the loudest slam yet. Whoever was in our yard had just smashed their face hard enough into the window to break it. We ran upstairs, two at a time, skipping the ones caved in with dry rot on instinct. I turned behind me once and Annie yanked my face back before I could see. The sound of broken glass echoed behind us as we made it to the bathroom, locking the door. A thin, wailing cry, like a baby calling for its mother, filled the hallway, trapped between the walls and locked doors. Annie threw her back against the door, feet jammed up against the bathtub, clutching the knife she had grabbed from the kitchen. I did the same, shoulder to shoulder. Slow footsteps started on the stairs, deliberate and casual. The crying had become mocking, almost laughter. Shrill bursts of sound and then giggles, high-pitched and abruptly stopping before starting again. The first door on the upstairs floor was my bedroom, and we heard the distinct sound of it slamming open. They were looking for us. "What the fuck is going on?" I asked Annie, not even bothering to brush away the tears that I couldn't stop falling. I watched my sister pick herself up off the floor and brace her hands on the door as we heard the sound of a second door slamming open. Mom's room. The next room on the hallway was the bathroom. Annie pulled me to my feet and handed me the knife. I shook my head and pushed it back to her, terrified of what would happen if I had to use it. Annie shoved me and pressed the knife into my hands, thumb pressing hard enough on the blade to bleed. I watched my sister's blood drip down her wrist, a winding red road still pushing into my hands despite the pain. I took the knife. Something slammed against the wall that Mom's room shared with the bathroom. A high-pitched wail followed. I held my breath, could feel my heart beat in the base of my throat, a wild and frantic thing. "I'm gonna get the phone from my room." I shook my head violently, about to argue. Annie clamped a hand over my mouth. I could taste the blood on her hand, salty and sweet, like birthday cake by the ocean. "Yes, I'm gonna get the phone and I'm gonna call the cops and we're going to be okay." I shook my head again. "It's the only way. When I go, I need you to lock the door and you don't open it for anything or anyone. Not for me, not for anyone. Promise me." I shook my head and Annie pressed her hand into my mouth, crushing my teeth against my lips so it made my eyes water. "Yes. Promise me, Em." Something smashed in the room next door. Annie brushed the hair off my face, gently tucking it behind my ear. "Promise," she mouthed, and unlocked the door as slowly as possible, bolt scraping gently. I watched the curve of her shoulder disappear into the black hall outside, like the moon in eclipse. And then she was gone. I couldn't move or breathe for a second, and then I slammed the bolt shut just as something bounced off the outside of the door. A high-pitched scream followed, handle rattling up and down hard enough to pop one of the screws. I watched it roll towards me on the tiles, and then silence. I sat with my back to the door, holding the knife and wishing I was holding Annie's hand instead. Still silence. Nothing but me and my lungs slowly filling the room with my breath. "Em?" came a voice through the door. I started, hands gripping the knife. "Honey, what's going on?" "Mom?" my voice cracked. "Mama, is that you?" I wrapped my arms around myself, shaking, trying to keep myself still. "Sweetie, it's okay, just open the door. It's okay, just let me in." The handle rattled again, gentler. "Just let me in. It's all okay." She banged on the door, and I took my handle of the bolt. "Honey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I missed your birthday. I'm sorry I'm such a terrible mother. Please." Her voice broke, and she started to cry. "Just let me in, baby. I'm so sorry." I screwed my eyes shut. She sounded so sad and so lost. I just wanted her to hold me like when I was a kid, and I'd come in off the swings with a scraped knee. Maybe this time she meant it. Maybe it would all be okay. My hand found its way to the bolt again. My sister's voice came through the door, warm and gentle. "Yeah, Emily let us in. It's all okay." My hand froze on the bolt and I tightened my grip on the knife. Annie never called me by my full name. A hand banged on the door, handle rattling. "Emily, let us in!" Annie's voice became low and guttural, followed by the same shrill giggles from before. Mom spoke now, pleading and crying, voice getting louder and louder. "Let us in, let us in, let us in," over and over again, punctuated by her fists on the door. I thought about demons and monsters, all the bedtime stories we pray don't crawl out from under the bed. "That's not my sister and you're not my mother," I screamed through the door, hands over my head. I climbed into the bathtub and curled in a ball, cradling myself, knife clutched to my chest. I didn't know what it was outside that door, but I knew it wasn't Annie. It wasn't the voice that yelled at when I changed TV channel, the one that sang me happy birthday, the one that told me I was smart even when I got bad grades, the one that read me stories about princesses that never wake up. It wasn't human. Bangs and yells came from downstairs, followed by the footsteps of people running. A low, guttural howl ripped through the house, filling the room until I felt like I was drowning in the sound, and then the door was kicked in. I screamed, covering my eyes, waiting to die. Arms found me and lifted me from the tub, carrying me from the room. I looked at the outside of the door as I was carried downstairs. It was covered in long, scraping claw marks, dragged down to the floor. Pillows ripped apart covered the hallway in soft down, like it had snowed inside. I watched them drift slowly as men in uniforms checked each of the rooms that looked like they had been torn apart by something feral. Outside in our driveway were police cars and an ambulance. In the middle of it all was Annie, bathed in blue and red light as it washed over her, lit up in the dark like a neon angel, face aglow. I threw myself from the cop's shoulder and ran to her, holding us both together, broken pieces and all, standing under all those constellations we made up. Gentle screaming came from the ambulance, which rocked occasionally. Annie gently turned my head away, smiling so sadly it made my chest ache as I understood. Turns out there was no demon, no wild animal or bad men trying to break in. Just Mom, out of her mind on booze and drugs and everything in between, coming to the end of a week-long binge. Something had finally broken inside her head, and this time we couldn't put her back together no matter how hard we tried. Sometimes you fall one last time and you never get back up. Annie had seen her in the garden, blood dribbling from her mouth, track marks bulging on her forearms like unmapped roads, rail thin and desperate for one more hit, one more fix. She'd searched the kitchen for all the drink I'd thrown away, and when she hadn't found it, had come to hunt for the stash she hid in the bathroom. She hadn't wanted me, just the drugs on the other side of the door, so high she could mimic Annie's voice almost perfectly. Turns out, the real monsters are the ones that eat you alive slowly, the kind that come in a bottle or a needle or at the end of a long list of reasons why you can't get out of bed in the morning. Sometimes the monsters are the ones that raise you or love you the most, but it's up to you if you let them in. She said no strings attached, but I think she lied. I'd like to start by admitting that I'm somewhat of a hermit. I live alone in the middle of nowhere. I don't own a cell phone, and I have exactly one real friend. As you can imagine, my life is pretty uneventful, or at least it used to be. That changed when I started dating a beautiful woman named Moira. Looking back, the past few days since I met her have been unusual, to say the least. But who am I to say what's normal? So I'm writing it all down and leaving it here for you to decide. Am I overthinking things, or does this all seem as strange to you as it does to me? Please let me know what you think in the comments. At the behest of Joshua, my best friend and social guide, I decided to set up an online dating profile. Having been out of the dating scene for an embarrassing amount of time, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Was I looking for something serious, something casual, just friends, or something more intimate? I wasn't stoked about the idea at first, and it wasn't until I came across her profile that I knew what I was actually looking for. A reason to get out of the house, out of my comfort zone, and away from the everyday tedium that was my life. Her bio read, "I'm outdoorsy, adventurous, and looking to have fun, hang out, and maybe grab a bite to eat. I'm not looking for anything serious, so don't expect me to catch feelings or stick around. No strings attached." The casual tone of her philosophy on dating gave me hope. Or maybe I just saw an opportunity. Every part of her bio seemed to speak directly to me. I wasn't outdoorsy or adventurous, but I was looking for a reason to be. I also wanted someone to hang out with and have fun with, someone besides Joshua, no offense if you're reading this. The cherry on top was the mention of no strings attached. That meant that even if things inevitably turned into a disaster, I could retreat into my shell and no one would get hurt. She'd move on to the next guy, and Joshua would finally get off my back. Besides her bio, her pictures were serene. Each one looked like a painting, with her as the focal point, and she looked absolutely stunning. She had long black hair and beautiful dark brown eyes. She was a little on the pale side, but who can resist the allure of a goth mommy? Or at least that's what Joshua called her when I showed him the pictures. There was just one thing off about them. They were all taken in the woods, by the lakeside, or in front of a waterfall. She wasn't kidding about being outdoorsy. The only way I can describe her aesthetic is Gothic cottagecore, and before you question how I know that, I just want to clarify that just because I'm a hermit doesn't mean I'm not chronically online. Joshua was a little cynical when I suggested her as my first choice. "She's a little out of your league, don't you think?" he said with uncertainty. I could tell he was trying to be nice and let me down easy, but I still went for it. I messaged her, and then immediately felt silly for even trying, Joshua's comment still echoing in the front of my mind. The echo was quickly pushed to the back of my thoughts, drowned out by the sound of a notification. "It was her," she replied instantly. After an hour of talking, I was already dressed and out the door, ready for our first date. I stopped on my way to the car, having completely forgotten to ask her where we were going. All I remembered her saying was that she wanted to go someplace to eat. I ran back to my computer and quickly looked for nearby places. After some frantic searching, I found a diner outside of town. It had one glowing 5-star review, and in my rush, I accepted it at face value. I went to the location she gave me, expecting to pick her up at her house, but instead, she was just kind of standing on the side of the road, with no side roads leading up to where she stood. If I hadn't been expecting her to be there, it would have felt like one of those ghost stories. The ones where hitchhikers appear in your back seat after you pass them by. But she didn't look scary at all. She looked even more beautiful than her pictures, almost glowing. The air around her smelled sweeter, and the sunlight seemed to shine just for her, like a spotlight. Though, that could have been the scent of the flowers around her or the way the sun reflected off her white dress. I leaned over, opened the passenger door, and gestured for her to get in. The uneasy silence stretched the 10-minute drive into what felt like an hour. The road was as rough as you'd expect on the outskirts of a small town, and my car's worn-out suspension didn't help. Needless to say, we were off to a bumpy start. The actual date went just as poorly. It didn't take long for me to realize I had picked the wrong place. To say the place was run down would be an understatement. There were unidentifiable stains on every table, and one persistent group of flies circled them. I think even the flies were too scared to land anywhere. The owner introduced himself, and I remember thinking his name sounded familiar. Normally, you can chalk that up to being a small-town thing, but I knew almost nobody from town, except for a handful of people I graduated high school with. And this guy clearly wasn't in the class of 2018. He was more or less my grandmother's age. We took a seat as far away from the bathroom as possible. You don't want to know what the place smelled like. Strangely enough, she didn't seem to mind the smell or the surroundings. Maybe she was just putting on a brave face because I was the only one who ordered something. I felt bad for taking her out to eat, and then choosing the one place no girl would ever want to eat at. She assured me she wasn't hungry, and even when I insisted I was paying, she just smiled and slid the menu over to my side of the table. "Pick your poison," she said with a smirk. Reluctantly, I ordered a cheeseburger with fries, and for drinks, I went with 2 bottles of water. I was just relieved to be drinking something that didn't come from whatever machine had produced those stains. The food arrived quickly. I still felt guilty about being the only one eating, so I offered her some fries and half my burger, but she politely declined. I didn't think much of it until a couple of bites into my burger, I had to use the bathroom. I jokingly asked, Would you mind keeping the flies off my food while I'm gone? She agreed with a playful smile. Of course, take your time, she said, a little too eagerly. The diner was cramped and the bathroom was barely separated from the seating area by a half wall that desperately tried but failed to quarantine the stench. As I washed my hands, I had a clear view of our table. I could see her eating from my plate. At first I thought it was cute. I thought she was just too shy to eat in front of me. But then I noticed how quickly and erratically she was grabbing the food. She must have been starving. But when I returned, my food seemed untouched. Not even a single fry was out of place. I could have sworn I saw her eating. At least she did a great job fending off the flies. There wasn't a single one in sight when I came back. Our second date was lovely compared to the first. The fresh air and beautiful scenery were a stark contrast to the stomach-churning experience at the so-called five-star diner. Technically, the two dates could be considered one long date since the second followed immediately after the first, but I'll refer to it as the second date, just to wash off the stink from the first one. When we left the diner, my head hung low with embarrassment. Do you want me to drop you off at home? I asked, searching for my car keys. Moira's face fell, a look of surprise and sadness washing over her. I think I even saw a tear. Or I can just drop you where I found you, I added quickly, trying to recover. This date couldn't have gone worse, I thought to myself while scrambling to console her. She put her arms around me, and just like that, the tears stopped. Does it have to be over? She whimpered. Now I was surprised. I'd thought I had blown my one chance, yet here she was giving me another shot. Looking back now, it seems more like she was the one pleading for another chance. Could this really be the same woman whose bio explicitly stated she wasn't looking to catch feelings? It only seems strange now in hindsight, but at the time, all I could do was say whatever would keep the sweet woman in front of me from crying. No, of course not. What did you have in mind? She paused, then, as if flipping a switch, her voice suddenly became calm and composed. Have you ever gone hiking? Hiking? Are you serious? I said with a chuckle. She frowned, not seeing the irony. Before I even messaged Moira that day, I had been talking to Joshua about first date ideas. Hiking was my first and only suggestion. I knew from her bio she'd love it. But Joshua wasn't convinced. You can't go hiking on a first date, that's ridiculous, Joshua scoffed. How can you expect a girl you don't even know to meet you in the middle of the woods? Not to mention, it's dangerous. I've been hiking before. My backyard is practically part of a hiking trail, I argued, trying to convince both him and myself that I was up for the task. No way. Nobody wants to get all sweaty and exhausted climbing a mountain on a first date, he said firmly, shutting down the idea. I wish I'd listened, but standing there in front of Moira, asking so little of me, how could I refuse? Besides, this wasn't our first date anymore, so Joshua's point didn't matter. I should have known the trail she had in mind started right where I picked her up, hidden in the underbrush and barely visible unless you knew where to look. I had to crouch down to squeeze through the narrow gap in the bushes. The earth beneath me was damp and cool, and the air was thick with the scent of wet leaves and rich soil. This was all so new to me. As soon as I emerged, the contrast was striking. My car, only a few meters away, was nearly invisible, swallowed by dense trees and undergrowth. The road was a distant hum, barely audible, as if belonging to another world. The forest enveloped me, its silence heavy, and the few sounds I could hear felt like a soft lullaby. This wasn't just a hike. It felt like stepping into another realm, a place that had always been here, just outside my home, waiting. Too bad it will be a long time before I can go hiking again. We followed a barely visible footpath for about 15 minutes, making awkward small talk. She was even shyer than I was, but I already liked her enough to want to break through her tough exterior, despite what her bio had said. Eventually, we reached a proper trail, much more defined than the one we'd been following. Staring at the path ahead, it seemed we had two choices, left or right. On the other side, a steep cliffside loomed, too steep for me, but seemingly made for mountain goats and creatures far nimbler than I was. Already a bit winded, I looked at Moira, trying to hide how out of shape I was, Left or right? I asked, exhaling quickly. She smirked, and without a word, grabbed a tree branch and started climbing. With no hesitation, she scaled the cliff with practiced ease like an expert climber. I could only watch in amazement. "Are you coming?" she called from the top. "I don't know. Seems kinda unsafe. Maybe there's another way up?" I scanned the area for an easier route. "Nope, this is the only way up. Come on. It's my favorite path. The view at the top will take your breath away," she teased, her tone playful, almost like a challenge. I hesitated, staring up at the cliff face. It didn't look too bad, but I could already feel the tension in my arms. I grabbed the first handhold, feeling the rough rock beneath my fingers. I was moving slowly and I almost made it to the top, but when I tried to steady myself and take a breath, my foot slipped on loose gravel. My heart raced as I fumbled for a grip. Just as I thought I was going to fall, a hand shot down and grabbed mine. Moira's grip was surprisingly strong, her fingers wrapping around mine with reassuring force. With a firm tug, she pulled me up. I scrambled to catch my breath, adrenaline still pulsing through me. "Thanks," I muttered, trying to hide how shaken I felt. Moira was one strong lady. She probably could have dragged me up there herself if I'd refused. I looked back at the path we came from, barely 5 meters above where I started. The same trees I had walked under now stretched below me. "That's it? This view is supposed to take my breath away?" I asked, irritation creeping into my voice. "No, silly, that's further up." She smiled, flicking her hair playfully before continuing her ascent. I remember thinking, how much further is this going to escalate? I was already worried about how I'd get back down, let alone going higher. Thankfully, the rest of the climb was relatively smooth. After about 30 minutes of carefully navigating a winding, uneven trail, I pushed through the final stretch of dense underbrush. The path didn't look man-made. It seemed more like something massive had carved through the forest, leaving a jagged trail in its wake. The bushes and trees on either side were thick, but what stood out the most was the smell. It was as if I were surrounded by a minefield of dead animals, yet I couldn't see a single carcass. The only thing that seemed out of place were the trees. At first glance, they appeared ordinary, no different from the ones lower on the mountain. But these were scattered with odd, bulbous growths. From the branches hung white, waxy shapes that reminded me of overripe fruit, but there was something wrong with them. Their shape resembled pine cones, but their surfaces were smooth and glistening in the light. The sizes varied wildly, some as large as prize pumpkins, others small and shriveled like withered pears. Still, I pushed on, just hoping the trail led somewhere. As we got closer, the sound grew louder. It started as a deep, rumbling roar, almost mechanical. Like the earth beneath me was groaning. As I got closer, it sounded like water over rocks, but heavier. The noise vibrated through my chest, a low hum that stirred the dead air around me. My steps slowed as the static noise gnawed at the back of my mind. As I pushed past the last few branches, we finally broke through into a clearing. I almost walked right into Moira. She was standing there with her back to me, the only thing between me and the source of the noise. She turned around, her white dress from earlier now caked in dirt, bits of plants clinging to her almost as desperately as I had when she pulled me up. She looked at me curiously. "You know, there's something different about you," she said with a curious smirk. Her words caught me off guard. It was the first thing either of us had said since I first heard the distant rumbling. Most guys would be full of questions by now. Are we there yet? What's that smell? What's that noise? How much further? Blah, blah, blah. But you seem oddly content, just following along, wherever the wind takes you, like a blank canvas or a lump of clay. She smiled. "I admire that about you." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, she began unbuttoning her dress. The shock flustered me, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes darted away from her, finally taking in my surroundings. We were on top of a much higher cliff. I stepped forward, feeling icy water seep into my shoes. We were standing at the edge of a waterfall. I'd found the rather mundane source of the otherworldly noise, but the sight before me was unlike anything I'd ever seen. However, my mind was elsewhere, on the woman in front of me, now in her underwear. She was right about taking my breath away. Her skin was impossibly smooth, flawless in a way that seemed unnatural for someone who climbed rugged rocks and broken branches all day. Flawless except for one spot. Too faded to be a tattoo, it resembled butterfly wings. It rested in the middle of her stomach, and it was tilted at a 90-degree angle, like an artist had started drawing something delicate but left it unfinished. For a fleeting moment, I almost likened it to a tramp stamp, but that didn't sit right. There was nothing crude about it. It was something else, subtle and elegant. Perhaps a birthmark? Beautiful, isn't it? Yes, I stuttered, unsure if she was talking about herself or the view. Would you join me for a swim? She asked enticingly. I don't know. The water up here seems a little shallow. I gestured at my soaked shoe. Plus, the current is a little too strong. I didn't mean up here, she said with the same challenging smirk as earlier. I stared at her blankly, feeling the blood drain from my face, down to my legs and into the icy water. Her implication was clear, almost demanding. I had already given up my right to say no the second we left the diner. She knew she had me wrapped around her surprisingly strong finger. I couldn't back down now. Even my logical side knew this was my best option, to jump into the white noise at the bottom of the waterfall and pray the water wasn't deceiving me, that it really was as bottomless as it had seemed. The only alternative was to climb down, alone. It's not that bad. The water will catch you, almost like a safety net, she said reassuringly. If someone asked you to jump off a cliff, would you do it? The answer is yes, if that someone was Moira. We had only just met, but I wanted her to take me everywhere she'd ever been. And if she was going down that waterfall, so was I. But not out of obedience. I was doing it for me. So Moira, if you're reading this, don't feel bad about what happened. It wasn't your fault. I had been following her every move. But even before I met her, I was already living life on autopilot, never taking risks. Going out with Moira today was supposed to be my first step toward changing that. So what's one more step? Even if it's off a cliff. I anxiously undressed, slipping off my waterlogged shoes and watching as the current took them over the edge. One pair of shoes was a small price to pay for a new life. I looked at Moira with all the steely determination of a man standing in his underwear. I inhaled as deep as I could, my chest swelling with newfound confidence. "Stand back, milady, I'll go first," I said in a voice befitting a hero. I rushed toward the edge, sharp rocks digging into my bare feet, trying to stop me before I did something foolish. But they only turned my triumphant dash into more of a brisk waddle. Then I saw it, sticking out of the water right on the edge, an unassuming, smooth, round rock. A tiny island in a sea of needles. So soft, inviting, flawless. It reminded me of Moira. I leaped onto the rock, placing all my faith in one foot. It failed me. It wasn't until I was already in the air that I realized my mistake. I slipped on the rock that once looked so innocent. Now it was biting into the back of my neck. The rest is only flashes and sounds. A loud thud, a soft crack, a bright sky swallowed by immediate darkness. Moira's scream was drowned out by the sound of rushing water, and the last thing I saw was the surface of the water spiraling closer as I made my descent. What exactly happened after I hit the water? That's something I'm still trying to figure out. It's important to note that I am writing this more than a week after my accident, but the memories are still surprisingly fresh. It took me a while to get this part written down, but I should have the next part posted within a week. But for now, my doctor is urging me to get some rest. I woke up in darkness, unsure where I was. My body felt stiff, my chest tightening with each breath, like something was constricting me. A coarse blanket weighed over me, suffocating in its own way. Even my arms felt heavy, pinned down by strings anchored into my veins. I was wrapped in a cocoon I couldn't escape. My neck was squeezed too tightly to take in enough air, and my breaths came in shallow bursts. I was a fly caught in a web. One by one, my senses returned. The soft hum of machines filled the silence, the sharp scent of antiseptic cutting through the haze. The room swam in and out of focus. It wasn't a web, it was a hospital bed. But even as the confusion faded, the feeling of being trapped didn't. I tried to move, but a sudden pain flared through my neck, the brace holding me still. I laid there awake for hours, hopeless. It wasn't until one of the nurses carefully turned me over to my side that I saw the bundle of flowers next to a bottle of whiskey. It was the same flowers from where I first picked up Moira. I knew it was from her. I don't recall much of our small talk leading up to the cliff, but I remember mentioning I was a whiskey guy. The faint memory gave me hope. I knew she was the one who had saved me from a watery grave. The only person who visited me was Joshua. I expected a friendly greeting, but all I got was an earful about how reckless I'd been. After an hour of "I told you so," he finally relented and asked about the rest of the date. I told him everything I could remember. To me, the events had happened only a few hours ago, but apparently I'd been in the hospital for a week before even waking up. And on top of that, another 3 days had passed before I was able to write anything down. Sorry you guys got the watered-down version of the events in part 1. The realization didn't hit me in the way you would think. I wasn't concerned about the time I lost. The only thought on my mind was if she still remembered me, if she still cared enough to see me again. In my current predicament, strung up in a hospital bed, I thought my chances with Moira were over. Desperate for any sort of way to communicate with her, I begged Joshua to bring my laptop to the hospital. He reluctantly agreed, but not before imparting more of his wisdom. I was growing sick of it. He paced up and down the hospital room, waving his hands like a preacher delivering a sermon. "I don't like this. Look at you. Look at where this Moira girl got you. You should be happy you're alive, man. If you keep pushing, I don't know how much more you can take. If you want my advice, just cut ties with her." And I cut him off before he could finish. "You don't even know her. How could you blame her for this? How can you point fingers when it was your advice that led to all of this?" I spoke harshly, aware of how defensive I was being. My words felt strange. Arguing with Joshua was something I'd never done before. We had never even disagreed on anything. This was the first time I pushed back instead of just going along with what he suggested. His calm response caught me off guard. "I do know her." His voice didn't sound convinced of the words it carried. "We briefly met at the hospital after your accident. We exchanged numbers. She asked me to let her know when you woke up." He hesitated, his uncertainty deepening. There was something off about her, man. Her eyes, they were colder and more aged than in her pictures. "Did you let her know?" I asked eagerly. His tone softened, shifting from ignorance to compassion. This was the Joshua I knew. "Not yet. I'll let her know tonight, and I'll bring you your laptop tomorrow. I can see this is important to you. I'm sorry you think this is my fault." With a slight grin, he continued, "But hey, at least you're out of the house." His twisted sense of humor almost made me chuckle, if only the pain would allow it. The next day couldn't come fast enough. The hope of seeing Moira again was all I could think about. In a misguided attempt to make the night pass quicker, I asked the nurses for more sedatives. I'm not sure what they gave me, but the effects were immediate. It was like I was pulled into a deep sleep, one I'd never known before. If only they'd warned me about the side effects. That night I had a nightmare brought on by whatever the nurses gave me. I was still trapped in the hospital in the same room, but now everything was shrouded in darkness. I awoke even slower than before, my senses muffled and distant. But I knew there was someone in the room with me, an old woman. I couldn't quite place her at first. The figure was small and frail, her presence oddly familiar, yet foreign. I thought it might be my grandmother, but then I remembered she'd died years ago. The woman knew I was awake and stood up from her chair. She quietly walked over to me and placed her hand on my face. It was cold, but as it pressed against my face, I felt a strange warmth, as if the touch was meant to comfort me. She leaned in closer, her breath cold against my ear. Then, in a voice soft yet chilling, she whispered, "Just point me to your pain, and I will do the rest. I'll clean you of this mess." In trade, I will request the recesses of your mind, of which I'll weave my nest. The words were cold and ominous, their implications comforting at first, and at the same time terrifying. Yet they were spoken as kindly as a lullaby, guiding me back to sleep. My laptop arrived the next morning, and with it the painful acceptance that my body was still too weak to make use of it. My message to Moira would have to wait. I spent the next 2 days trapped in my own thoughts, barely able to move. On the third day of waiting for Moira to visit, I finally caved. Ignoring the doctor's advice, I convinced a nurse to help me set up my laptop. I needed to write her something just to show I was alive. Once I booted up my laptop, I was met with the last page I had visited before our date. The nurse looked at me funny as I tried to suppress my laughter. There, in bold letters, right above 5 glowing stars, I realized why the diner owner's name sounded familiar. Not wanting to dwell on our first date any longer, I closed the page and opened Moira's messages. No new messages. In fact, it looked like Moira hadn't been online for the past week. My heart sank knowing she hadn't written me, but at least she wasn't online looking for someone else. I sent her a pretty desperate and way too long message that she hasn't replied to yet. So I won't repeat it here for my own sake and for whoever ends up reading this. With nothing else to do between physical therapy and doctor's visits, I decided to write down my experience so far, mostly as a mental exercise to try and remember what happened, and to serve as a warning to myself and anyone else planning to go hiking on their first date. Since I woke up, it took me almost another week of writing, but I'm finally all caught up. I know that seems slow, but between piecing together my memories and then painfully writing them down, I think I did okay, and just in time too. I'm finally getting released today. Joshua is picking me up in my car. He gave Moira my address so she could leave my car there. She didn't know what else to do with it after driving me to the hospital that day, the day I spent so long trying to recall. The next thing I write should be from the comfort of my own home. I should feel relieved, but I can't shake this strange, lingering feeling. Like there's something I'm forgetting, but I can't quite place my finger on it. My first night back was worse than anything I've ever experienced. Not even the creepy old lady at the hospital can compare to what happened last night. Let me preface this by saying, I don't usually have a nightcap before bed, but last night I made an exception. When I got home and unpacked my things, I found the bouquet of dead flowers that served as a reminder of my relationship status with Moira. I put them into a vase of water, even though I fear it might be too late. With a sad sigh, I picked up the bottle of whiskey Moira had given me as a get-well-soon gift. I'd planned to keep it for sentimental value, but after these last 2 weeks, I figured I deserved a drink. Falling asleep was easy, even with the itchy neck brace. I don't know if it was the whiskey or the last few sleepless nights I spent in that rigid yet worn-out hospital bed, but I was exhausted. So tired that I even felt groggy during my dream, almost like the anesthetic the doctors gave me hadn't worn off yet. I guess it's my fault for mixing my pain medication with vintage. I should have known something was off the moment I got home, but exhaustion has a way of dulling your instincts. The dream started like any other. I was drifting in that strange state between falling asleep and clinging to consciousness. Of course, I know now that I must have been asleep and dreaming, because there's no logical explanation for what happened next. The room was silent as any other night outside the city. My eyes were closed and I could almost convince myself I was asleep. But then I heard it. It was faint, but unmistakable. The heavy silence was broken up by what I can only describe as the sound of fingers cracking or ligaments popping into place. My eyes shot open. Something was moving, crawling onto the mattress. I couldn't see it, not fully. At this point, it was merely a suggestion of motion in my periphery. That's when I felt it, a slow, calculated weight shifting closer from the foot of my bed. I was begging every muscle in my body to allow me to sit up and turn on the light. Not a single one listened to my plea. The only thing I could move was my eyes. I looked down, as far down as my eyes would allow. I tried to lift my head, but if the paralysis wasn't enough to keep me anchored, the neck brace made sure of it. It was hopeless. I could feel the pressure building in my throat, making it almost impossible to breathe. The popping noise faded, replaced by the relentless pounding of my heartbeat, hammering against my eardrums as if desperate to escape. All the while, the silhouette was inching closer, the weight carefully shifting on the mattress. The shape was hovering over me, making sure not to touch me. My breathing was rapid and uncontrollable, and my heartbeat was growing louder, so I did the only thing I could in that situation. I used the only part of my body I still had control over, my eyes. I shut them with the same force I had opened them when I first heard that dreadful noise. The instant I closed my eyes, everything went quiet, all movement stopped, and my mattress was suddenly as stiff as the hospital bed I had grown accustomed to. It was all inside my head, I thought. It's just a bad dream. Keep your eyes closed and focus on falling asleep. This will all be over when you wake up. I laid there for what felt like hours, but realistically, it was just a few minutes. All I could do was wait. Wait for sleep, or wait for my body to finally respond. I'm not a patient man, and I never have been. But after what I saw last night, I will never even complain about a red light ever again. I wish I had kept my eyes closed, but against my better judgment, I slowly opened them, my eyes adjusting to the darkness all too easily. Then I saw it, its face only a few centimeters from mine. The skin was smooth and pale, cracked like a porcelain doll, and stretched too tightly over the ridges of its face. But it was the eyes that held me in place. A row of 8 black pearls that tapered out to the sides, the largest of which was a pair placed right in the middle, easily distinguishable by the glint of light collected in them, like pools of ink sucking up the last bit of light from the room. The time for screaming had long passed. All I could do was stare. I didn't even bother attempting to move anymore. For all I knew, my paralysis had worn off, but I didn't care. Its gaze was unblinking, relentless, consuming. The darkness inside those eyes seemed to ripple, as though something moved just beneath. The sharp reflection of the room was mirrored in their glossy surfaces. The longer I stared, the more the room's reflection fell out of focus, and I could feel myself slipping further into pure darkness. I was falling down a well and unraveling like a poorly made basket drifting into the void. The next thing I remember is waking up, expecting the usual soft morning light to seep through my paper-thin curtains, gradually brightening the room. Instead, the harsh midday sun spilled in unapologetically. Still, it was a welcomed change from the unforgiving darkness of the previous night. I glanced at my alarm clock but couldn't see the time. Slowly, I turned my stiff body and clumsily reached over, knocking the half-empty whiskey bottle out of the way. It was almost 3 p.m. Still half asleep, I stumbled out of my room into the hallway. At first, I thought the old stained wallpaper had little square patches of new wallpaper stuck over it. Then I noticed the wooden floorboards were scattered with broken glass and fallen picture frames. I didn't bother picking up all of them, but one caught my attention. When I took it out of the broken frame, I saw myself and my grandmother standing in front of an old house in the woods. I was just a child. Beside us were 2 unfamiliar faces, a man and a woman. An aunt and uncle? Family friends? My parents? Why can't I remember what happened to them? Memories swam around in my head, but none pertained to my parents. I was starving by this point, so I figured I'd save time and make breakfast, lunch, and dinner all at once, which just meant pouring a comically large bowl of cereal. Now I'm sitting at my dining room table, spoon in one hand and the other on my keyboard, writing down what I remember from last night's dream. All the while, I was thinking of the photograph next to my laptop, the old picture patiently resting on the polished surface of my grandmother's vintage table. I slid it closer, shifting my focus from the 2 strangers. I instead studied the background. A brand new tire swing hung from an old tree. And the house. I couldn't quite place it, but I knew I had been there as a kid. Strangely, recalling details from the picture felt harder than remembering a dream. On a different note, I once read something online about Chinese water torture. Don't ask me why I remember this, but not my childhood. Memories are strange like that. Anyway, it's a method where drops of water are slowly dripped onto a person's head at irregular intervals. The randomness of the dripping can lead to psychological effects, since the victim can't anticipate when the next drop will fall. Over time, this can lead to anxiety, stress, and even hallucinations. About halfway through writing this entry, I started feeling a faint, inconsistent dripping coming from the ceiling above me. I'd describe the source, but that would require me to get up, take almost 4 steps back, and painfully crane my head far enough back to even see the ceiling. It's too much effort for what I already know is just a leak. I've tried moving seats 3 times, but the dripping seems to follow me wherever I sit. Then it happened. After finishing my cereal and absent-mindedly twirling my spoon, I swear I saw something. On the glossy surface of the spoon, a flash of movement caught my eye, a large shape skittering across the ceiling behind me. It moved like a shadow, but its color was a pale white. I saw it only for a second. It was swift and fleeting, but its form was unmistakable. A spider, bigger than a person, its 8 legs pushing and pulling it out of the room in one smooth, coordinated motion. I almost jumped out of my skin. I spun around as fast as I could, whipping my head back. The pain was immense, shooting through me like lightning striking the back of my neck. In my frantic attempt to look at the ceiling, I found myself on my hands and knees, staring at the floor. Slowly, I pulled myself back onto the chair. I was lightheaded, on the verge of fainting. I jumped at every black spot in my vision. For a moment, I just sat there trying to make sense of what I had seen. It was then that I recalled reading about water torture and how it can cause hallucinations, which oddly gave me some comfort. At least now the dripping has stopped. I'll post all I have written so far for part 2. I can't bear to sit here and write another word. Not after what I just saw. I think I'll message Joshua to come over. I can't be alone right now. I'll keep you guys updated if anything else happens. Expect another part soon. A shattered life, and I don't know when you're going to read this, but I can tell you when it started. I was out for a walk alone in the woods when the entity came for me. It was beyond a blur. It was, for lack of a better term, absence of meaning. Where it hid, there were no trees. Where it crept closer, there was no grass. Through the arc it leapt at me. There was no breeze of motion. There was no air at all. As it struck, I felt the distinct sensation of claws puncturing me somewhere unseen, somewhere I'd never felt before. My hands and arms and legs and torso seemed fine and I wasn't bleeding, but I knew I'd been injured somehow. As I fearfully ran back home, I could tell that I was less. I was vaguely tired, and it was hard to focus at times. The solution at that early stage was easy. A big cup of coffee helped me feel normal again. For a while, that subtle drain on my spirit became lost in the ebb and flow of caffeine in my system. You could say my life began that week, actually, because that was when I met Mar. She and I got along great, though. To be honest, I'm pretty sure I fell in love with her over the phone before we even met. It was almost as if the strong emotions of that first week made the entity fight back. It was still with me, latched on to some invisible part of my being. The first few incidents were minor, and I hardly worried about them. The color of a neighbor's car changed from dark blue to black one morning, and I stared at it before shaking my head and shrugging off the difference. 2 days later at work, a co-worker's name changed from Fred to Dan. I carefully asked around, but everyone said his name had always been Dan. I figured I'd just been mistaken. Then, as ridiculous as this sounds, I was peeing in my bathroom at home when I suddenly found myself on a random street. I was still in my pajamas, pants down, and urinating, but now in full view of a dozen people at a bus stop. Horrified, I pulled up my clothes and ran before someone called the cops. I did manage to get home, but the experience forced me to admit that I was still in danger. The entity was doing something to me, and I didn't understand how to fight back. Mar showed up that evening, but she had her own key. "Hey," I asked her with confusion. "How'd you get a key?" She just laughed. "You're cute. Are you sure you're okay with this?" She opened a door and entered a room full of boxes. "I know living together is a big step, especially when we've only been dating 3 months. Living together? I'd literally just met her the week before. Thing was, my mother had always called me a smart cookie for a reason. I knew when to shut my yap. Instead of causing a scene, I told her everything was fine, and then I went straight to my room and began investigating. My things were just as I had left them, with no sign of a 3-month gap in habitation. But I did find something out of the ordinary. The date. I shivered angrily as I processed the truth. The entity had eaten 3 months of my life. What the hell was I facing? What kind of creature could consume pieces of one's soul like that? I'd missed the most exciting part of a new relationship, and I would never understand any shared stories or in-jokes from that period. Something absurdly precious had been taken from me, and I was furious. That fury helped suppress the entity. I never imbibed alcohol. I drank coffee religiously. I checked the date every time I woke up. For 3 years, I managed to live each day while observing nothing more than minor alterations. A social fact here and there, someone's job, how many kids they had, that sort of thing, the layout of nearby streets, the time my favorite television show aired, that kind of thing. Always, those changes reminded me the creature still had its claws sunk into my spirit. Not once in 3 years did I ever let myself zone out. One day, I grew careless. I let myself get really into the season finale of my favorite show. It was gripping, a fantastic story. Right at the height of the action, a young boy came up to my lounger and shook my arm. Surprised, I asked, "Who are you? How did you get in here?" He laughed and smiled brightly. "Silly daddy." My heart sank in my chest. I knew immediately what had happened. After a few masked questions, I discovered that he was 2 years old, and that he was my son. The agony and heartache filling my chest was nearly unbearable. Not only had I missed the birth of my son, I would never see or know the first years of his life. Mar and I had obviously gotten married and started a family in the time I'd lost, and I had no idea what joys or pains those years contained. It was snowing outside. Holding my sudden son in my lap, I sat and watched the flakes fall outside. What kind of life was this going to be if slips in concentration could cost me years? I had to get help. The church had no idea what to do. The priests didn't believe me and told me I had a health issue rather than some sort of possession. The doctors didn't have any clue. Nothing showed up on all their scans and tests, but they happily took my money in return for nothing. By the time I ran out of options, I decided to tell March. There was no way to know what this all looked like from her side. What was I like when I wasn't there? Did I still take our son to school? Did I still do my job? Clearly I did, because she seemed to be none the wiser. But I still had a horrible feeling that something must have been missing in her life when I wasn't actually home inside my own head. But the night I set up a nice dinner in preparation, she arrived not by unlocking the front door, but by knocking on it. I answered and found that she was in a nice dress. She was happily surprised by the settings on the table. "A fancy dinner for a second date? I knew you were sweet on me." Thank the Lord I knew when to keep my mouth shut. If I'd gone on about being married and having a son, she might have run for the hills. Instead, I took her coat and sat down for our second date. Through carefully crafted questions, I managed to deduce the truth. This really was our second date. She saw relief and happiness in me, but interpreted that as dating jitters. I was just excited to realize that the entity wasn't necessarily eating whole portions of my life. The symptoms, as I was beginning to understand them, were more like the consequences of a shattered soul. The creature had wounded me, broken me into pieces. Perhaps I was to live my life out of order, but at least I would actually get to live it. And so it went for a few years, from my perspective. While minor changes in politics or geography would happen daily, major shifts in my mental location only happened every couple months. When I found myself in a new place and time in my life, I just shut up and listened, making sure to get the lay of the land before doing anything to avoid making mistakes. On the farthest flung leap yet, I met my 6-year-old grandson, and I asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. He said writer. I told him that was a fine idea. Then I was back in month 2 of my relationship with Mar, and I had the best night with her on the riverfront. When I say the best, I mean the best. Knowing how special she would become to me, I asked her to move in. I got to live through what I'd missed the first go-around, and I came to understand that I was never mentally absent. I would always be there, eventually. When we were moving her boxes in, she stopped for a moment and said she marveled at my great love, as if I'd known her for a lifetime and never once doubted she was the one. That was the first time I'd truly laughed freely and wholeheartedly since the entity had wounded me. She was right about my love for her, but for exactly the reason she'd considered a silly romantic analogy. I had known her my whole life, and I'd come to terms with my situation and found peace with it. It wasn't so bad to have sneak peeks at all the best parts ahead, but of course I wouldn't be writing this if it hadn't gotten worse. The entity was still with me. It had not wounded me and departed like I'd wanted to believe. The closest I can describe my growing understanding was that the creature was burrowing deeper into my psyche, fracturing it into smaller pieces. Instead of months between major shifts, I began having only weeks. Once I noticed that trend, I feared my ultimate fate would be to jump between times in my life, heartbeat by heartbeat, forever confused, forever lost. Only an instant in each time meant I would never be able to speak with anyone else, never be able to hold a conversation, never express or receive love. As the true depth of that fear came upon me, I sat in an older version of me and watched the snow falling outside. That was the one constant in my life. The weather didn't care who I was or what pains I had to face. Nature was always there. The falling snow was always like a little hook that kept me in a place. The pure emotional peace it brought was like a panacea on my mental wounds. And I'd never yet shifted while watching the pattern of falling white and thinking of the times I'd gone sledding or built a snow fort as a child. A teenager touched my arm. "Grandpa?" "Eh?" He'd startled me out of my thoughts, so I was less careful than usual. "Who are you?" He half grinned, as if not sure whether I was joking. Handing me a stack of papers, he said, "It's my first attempt at a novel. Would you read it and tell me what you think?" Ah, of course. Pursuing that dream of being a writer, I see. He burned bright red. Trying to, anyway. "All right, run off. I'll read this right now." The words were blurry, and annoyed, I looked for glasses I probably had for reading. Being old was terrible, and I wanted to leap back into a younger year, but not before I read his book. I found my glasses in a sweater pocket and began leafing through. Mar puttered in and out of the living room, still beautiful, but I had to focus. I didn't know how much time I would have there. It seemed that we had relatives over. Was it Christmas? A pair of adults and a couple kids I didn't recognize tromped through the hallway, and I saw my son, now adult, walk by with his wife on the way out the door. As a group, the extended family began sledding outside. Finally, I finished reading the story, and I called out for my grandson. He rushed down the stairs and into the living room. "How was it?" "Well, it's terrible," I told him truthfully. "But it's terrible for all the right reasons. You're still a young man, so your characters behave like young people. But the structure of the story itself is very solid." I paused. "I didn't expect it to turn out to be a horror story." He nodded. "It's a reflection of the times. Expectations for the future are dismal, not hopeful like they used to be." "You're far too young to be aware like that," I told him. An idea occurred to me. "If you're into horror, do you know anything about strange creatures?" "Sure. I read everything I can. I love it." Warily, I scanned the entrances to the living room. Everyone was busy outside. For the first time, I opened up to someone in my life about what I was experiencing. In hushed tones, I told him about my fragmented consciousness. For a teenager, he took it well. "You're serious?" "Yes." He donned the determined look of a grown man accepting a quest. "I'll look into it, see what I can find out. You should start writing down everything you experience. Build some data. Maybe we can map your psychic wound." Wow. Sounds like a plan. I was surprised. That made sense, and I hadn't expected him to have a serious response. But how will I get all the notes in one place? "Let's come up with somewhere for you to leave them," he said, frowning with thought. "Then I'll get them, and we can trace the path you're taking through your own life. See if there's a pattern." For the first time since the situation had gotten worse, I felt hope again. How about under the stairs? Nobody ever goes under there. Sure. He turned and left the living room. I peered after him. I heard him banging around near the stairs. Finally, he returned with a box, laid it on the carpet, and opened it to reveal a bursting stack of papers. He exclaimed, "Holy crap!" But of course, being a teenager, he didn't really say crap. Taken aback, I blinked rapidly, forgiving his cussing because of the shock. Did I write those? He looked up at me with wonder. Yeah. Or, you will. You still have to write them and put them under the stairs after this. He gazed back down at the papers, then covered the box. So you probably shouldn't see what they say. That could get weird. That much I understood. Right. He gulped. There are like 50 boxes under there, all filled up like this. Deciphering these will take a very long time. His tone dropped to deadly seriousness. But I will save you, Grandpa, because I don't think anyone else can. Tears flowed down my cheeks then, and I couldn't help but sob once or twice. I hadn't realized how lonely I'd become in my shifting prison of awareness until I finally had someone who understood. Thank you. Thank you so much. And then I was young again, and at work on a random Tuesday. Once the sadness and relief faded, anger and determination replaced them. After I finished my work, I grabbed some paper and began writing. While the weeks shifted around me, while those weeks became days and then hours, I wrote every single spare moment about when and where I thought I was. I put them under the stairs out of order. My first box was actually the 30th, and my last box was the 1st. Once I had over 50 boxes written from my perspective, and once my shifting became a matter of minutes, I knew it was up to my grandson to take it from there. I put my head down and stopped looking. I couldn't stand the river of changing awareness any longer. Names and places and dates and jobs and colors and people were all wrong and different. I'd never been older. I sat watching the snow fall. A man of at least 30 that I vaguely recognized entered the room. Come on. I think I finally figured it out. I was so frail that moving was painful. Are you him? Are you my grandson? Yes. He took me to a room filled with strange equipment and sat me in a rubber chair facing a large mirror twice the height of a man. The pattern finally revealed itself. How long have you worked on this? I asked him aghast. Tell me you didn't miss your life like I'm missing mine. His expression was both stone cold and furiously resolute. It'll be worth it. He brought 2 thin metal rods close to my arm and then nodded at the mirror. Look, this shock is carefully calibrated. The electric zap from his device was startling, but not painful. In the mirror, I saw a rapid arcing light silhouette appear above my head and shoulder. The electricity moved through the creature like a wave, briefly revealing the terrible nature of what was happening to me. A bulging leech-like mouth was wrapped around the back of my head, coming down to my eyebrows and touching each ear, and its slug-like body ran over my shoulder and into my very soul. It was a parasite, and it was feeding on my mind. My now-adult grandson held my hand as I took in the horror. After a moment, he asked, "Removing it is going to hurt very badly. Are you up for this?" Fearful, I asked, "Is Mar here?" His face softened. Number not for a few years now. I could tell from his reaction what had happened, but I didn't want it to be true. How? We have this conversation a lot, he responded. Are you sure you want to know? It never makes you feel better. Tears brimmed in my eyes. Then I don't care if it hurts or if I die. I don't want to stay in a time where she's not alive. He made a sympathetic noise of understanding and then returned to his machines to hook several wires, diodes, and other bits of technology to my limbs and forehead. While he did so, he talked. I've worked for 2 decades to figure this out, and I've had a ton of help from other researchers of the occult. This parasite doesn't technically exist in our plane. It's one of the lesser spawns of Mu Beta Mu, and it feeds on the plexus of mind, soul, and quantum consciousness, reality. When details like names and colors of objects changed, you weren't going crazy. The web of your existence was merely losing strands as the creature ate its way through you. I didn't fully understand. I looked up in confusion as he placed a circlet of electronics like a crown on my head, in exact line with where the parasite's mouth had ringed me. "What's mu beta mu?" He paused his work and grew pale. "I forgot that you wouldn't know. You're lucky, believe me." After a deep breath, he began moving again and placed his fingers near a few switches. "Ready? This is carefully tuned to make your nervous system extremely unappetizing to the parasite, but it's basically electroshock therapy." I could still see Mars smile, even though she was dead. I'd just been with her moments ago. "Do it." The click of a switch echoed in my ears, and I almost laughed at how mild the electricity was. It didn't feel like anything, at least at first. Then I saw the mirror shaking, and my body within that image convulsing. Oh, number, it did hurt. Nothing had ever been more painful. It was just so excruciating that my mind hadn't been able to immediately process it. As my vision shook and fire burned in every nerve in my body, I could see the reflected, trembling light silhouette of the parasite on my head as it writhed in agony equal to mine. It had claws, 6 clawed, lizard-like limbs under its leech-like body, and it cut into me in an attempt to stay latched on. The electricity made my memories flare. Mars' smile was foremost, lit brightly in front of a warm fire as the snow fell past the window behind her. The edges of that memory began lighting up, and I realized that my life was one continuous stretch of experience. It was only the awareness of it that had been fragmented by that feasting evil on my back. I'd never managed to be there for the birth of my son. I'd jumped around it a dozen times, but never actually lived it. For the first time, I got to hold Mars' hand and be there for her. Number, no. That moment had shifted seamlessly into holding her hand as she lay in a hospital bed for a very different reason. Not this. God, why? It was so merciless to make me remember this. I broke down in tears as nurses rushed into the room. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to experience it. I'd seen all the good parts, but I hadn't wanted the worst part, the inevitable end that all would one day face. It wasn't worth it. It was tainted. All that joy was given back 10,000-fold as pain. The fire in my body and in my brain surged to sheer white torture, and I screamed. My scream faded into a surprised shout as the machines and electricity and chair faded away. Snow was no longer falling around my life. I was out in the woods on a bright summer day. Oh God. I turned to see the creature approaching me. It was the same absence of meaning, the same blank on reality. It crept forward just like before, but this time it hissed and turned away. I stood, astounded at being young again and freed from the parasite. My grandson had actually done it. He'd made me an unappetizing meal, so the predator of mind and soul had moved on in search of a different snack. I returned home in a daze, and while I was sitting there processing all that had happened, the phone rang. I looked at it in awe and sadness. I knew who it was. It was Marjorie, calling for the first time for some trivial reason she'd admit 30 years later was made up just to talk to me. But all I could see was her lying in that hospital bed dying. It was going to end in unspeakable pain and loneliness. I would become an old man, left to sit by myself in an empty house, his soulmate gone long before him. At the end of it all, the only thing I would have left, sitting and watching the falling snow. But now, thanks to my grandson, I would also have my memories. It would be a wild ride, no matter how it ended. On a sudden impulse, I picked up the phone. With a smile, I asked, "Hey, who's this?" Even though I already knew. Author's note. Together, my grandfather and I did set out to write the tale of his life. Unfortunately, his Alzheimer's disease progressed rapidly, and we were never able to finish. He's still alive, but I imagine that, mentally, he's in a better place than the nursing home. I like to think he's back in his younger days, living life and being happy, because the reality is much colder. It's snowing today. He loves the snow. When I visited him, he didn't recognize me, but he did smile as he sat looking out the window. My friends and I found an abandoned oil rig. I watched as the helicopter pilot began his preparations to take off, barely a minute after touching down on the helipad. As Mark helped Savannah step down off the vehicle, the pilot gestured towards his headset, and I fished my radio receiver from my pocket and put my own headset on, barely quieting the still spinning rotors. "You guys good?" "I think we're good here, man. Thanks again." "Don't mention it. Just remember that you've only got exactly 48 hours. If you're not back on the platform and ready by then, I'll have to wait another week to swing back around and get you, and that'll cost extra. Good luck. I'll see you guys then." I thanked him, and as soon as the others finished unloading our prepared bags onto the helipad, we stood and watched as the helicopter took flight and disappeared quickly into the inky blackness of a starless night. I waited a moment longer, looking out into the open ocean below me, my headlight beam faintly glittering against the calm ripples of the sea. "We don't have all night. Let's get indoors before the wind picks up," Julian muttered, breaking the silence. I turned away from the sea and towards the group. Julian had already picked up his duffel bag and had already begun to hastily move towards the stairs descending to the crew quarters. Mark seemed solemn as usual, but even in the dark, I could make out the smile creeping through his face as he helped Savannah grab her bags as she kissed him on the cheek. Maria sat silent, eyes locked on the clouds that had swallowed up our transport. As Mark and Savannah descended out of view, I stood next to my sister, putting my hand on her tense shoulder as I noticed her knuckles turn white, gripping her backpack. "You all right?" I asked after a moment. She stood motionless, and I felt her shoulder shivering. "Mark said we should be able to get the rig's reserve power on. If we get inside, we'll be able to warm up." She turned her head to me and attempted to mask her frightened face with a sheepish smile. "Yeah, sure. Sorry, it's just different than I expected." "A bit, yeah." I lied. In truth, I'd studied my ass off doing as much weeks prior to our arrival at the rig. I'd poured through company records, I'd watched every video I could explaining oil rig architecture, and I'd even researched local oceanic weather patterns this time of year for this area. She'd begged to come along, but now, standing here shaking, it was obvious she hadn't prepared like the rest of us. I gently grabbed her backpack from her shaking hand and made my way towards the staircase. She followed close behind, and as we made our way towards the large bolted door sealing off the crew area, she quietly called over, "Hey, Eli? What's up? Thanks for letting me and Julian tag along." I nodded, as if it were no big deal that they'd been permitted to join this expedition. Mark had approached me weeks ago with the opportunity of a lifetime. An oil rig in international waters, decommissioned for almost a decade, unmanned, and slated to be dismantled in the coming months. Even though we were further from a city than any of us had ever been, this was undoubtedly an urban explorer's wet dream. It had been years since Mark, Savannah, and I had the opportunity to go somewhere new, and with our increasingly busy lives, we figured that this was the perfect last hurrah for our old hobby. The timing worked out perfect, and we each managed to scrape enough money together to find and hire a private helicopter pilot to make the 2 trips required to drop us off and pick us back up. In all fairness, Maria had joined us on some of our trips in years prior. Being a few years younger than us, we'd opted to only let her tag along on our lower stakes outings, but she was an adult now and had begged to be allowed to come with us for this final trip. It took a substantial amount of convincing for Savannah and Mark to vote yes on bringing her, but it certainly didn't hurt that Maria's new boyfriend, Julian, had actually worked 6 months on a rig a few years back. As I pushed the heavy iron door open, the hinges groaned against the salt-corroded metal, the sound carrying through the empty corridors. I found the rest of the group already making their way through the narrow hallway, and was relived to see that the area generally matched what I'd already researched. The quarters consisted of 2 floors, the upper of which we were currently passing through to reach the lower-level access stairs at the end of the hall. We passed the expected amenities, including a galley, a laundry room, several changing rooms, and a large dry storage pantry, long empty. The crew living area, consisting of a common room and several shared bedrooms, waited for us 1 level below. As we descended the stairs, we each found a bedroom to begin to unload our things. For the next 2 nights, these quiet, windowless white rooms would be our home. I unpacked my bedroll and went to sit on the bunk bed when I heard Mark call out to gather us in the hall. As I stood in the doorway, he smiled and looked around at each of us before speaking. All right, so we made it. Place seems to be in much better condition than we expected too, which is a good sign. I think before we start settling in for the night though, we should review our plan. A couple of us let out an overly dramatic sigh, and I looked over to see Savannah chuckle as she rolled her eyes. Even though a plan was a necessity in a situation like this, we all knew that Mark would plan his own funeral if he could. Yeah, get it out of your system, Mark smirked. We'll have a busy day of fooling around out here tomorrow, but there are still precautions and things we need to take care of first. Julian, you'll come with me up to the control deck here in a minute to see if we can get the auxiliary generators running. That'll get us some light and heat in here. Elijah, you stay here with Maria and Sav. Julian, you ready? Sure, just give me a minute to get my stuff. I looked across the hall to see Julian smiling for the first time all day. He was hard to read at times, but I could tell the familiarity of a place like this was slowly starting to bring him to life. As Mark dismissed us from our meeting, I smiled as I gestured a sloppy salute. I watched Julian pop back into the room he'd chosen and shut the door behind him for a few moments. A minute later, he emerged, pulling a pair of bolt cutters and utility gloves from his duffel bag. Maria, already changed into more comfortable clothes, ran her fingers through his curly hair and hugged him before he and Mark left. For the first time since we'd boarded the helicopter earlier that evening, I had a few minutes to unwind. It was still too cold inside to take off my jacket just yet, but I kicked off my boots and laid down on the carpeted floor. Unlike anything we'd ever explored before, this place was actually fairly well kept. The carpet, although old and shaggy, was free of debris and still felt soft to the touch. My headlamp illuminated a pristine white ceiling, lower than what I expected. As Maria tried to keep idle conversation with Savannah, I just smiled and shut my eyes for a minute, enjoying the satisfaction of having pulled off the coolest B and E ever. It must have been about 10 minutes later when a low, vibrating grumble shook the floor beneath us for just a minute, before settling to a droning hum barely perceptible but distinct from the ocean waves. I felt a shot of icy ocean air begin to flow through the vent above my head, before softening and becoming warm and cozy comfort. I stood up and quickly located a light switch at the end of the hallway. Flicking it bathed us in bright, artificial white light. The girls stood up, and we began to take in our surroundings in full when the door at the far end of the common room swung open, Mark and Julian returning to join us in the warm. Maria ran up to Julian and practically tackling him as she showered praises on him with the giddiness of a schoolgirl. Mark sauntered across the newly ago interior, taking in its artifice and cramped nature, before plopping down next to Savannah, resting his head on her shoulder. He looked more tired than usual, and I recognized his brow furrow. How was it out there? You guys find the control deck okay? I prodded after a moment. Yeah, it was fine. Julian had it right on the money. Dude knew exactly where to take us, right over the moon pool at the very top. He sounded almost apathetic as he told me, his eyes gazing off into nowhere as Savannah scratched his back. Everything okay, man? You seem a little out of it? Something happen out there? Mark stared blankly for a few seconds, until his eyes focused on me and he seemed to process what I'd said. Oh yeah, no, nothing happened, don't worry, it's just like, you know when you're hit with a really bad deja vu and instead of it only lasting a second, it lasts for like a minute or two? Savannah stopped scratching his back and wrapped her arm around his shoulders, pulling him closer. Yeah, she chimed in. I get that sometimes. It's probably gonna happen at least once or twice when we're here. Been a while since we got in somewhere that wasn't rinsed already. It'll feel just like college. Yeah, I guess so. Mark seemed distant still. Julian and Maria came and sat down in the hall with us, smiling and holding hands. After a few seconds, Mark's eyes suddenly lit up. You guys won't believe how sick tomorrow's gonna be. Even just what I could see with my headlamp looked incredible. Up top in the control room, there's a shit ton of old broadcasting equipment, and you'll never guess what Julian found under the control desk. He paused, either for dramatic effect or because he really wanted us to guess. After a moment of our non-compliance, he rolled his eyes and reached into his jacket's interior pocket, pulling out a key ring with what I could only assume was every key and access tag we'd need to find our way around the facility. Holy shit, it was just there under the desk? Yeah, he said on his old rig, the manager dude, Hey Jewel, what did you say he's called? The tool pusher, Julian said, wrapping his arm around Maria as she pulled at the carpet. Yeah, the tool pusher. Anyways, the tool pusher would always keep a master key set in his office. Only people with the office key could get in, so it was never a problem. Thankfully, we brought a key of our own. He gestured towards the bolt cutters that Julian had set down in the hall. We laughed for a moment, and then a few more. It was good to all be here and to have successfully pulled this off. We'd never cracked anything like this before, and I won't lie, I think we were all just a little giddy that we'd done it. After a bit, Maria caught me beginning to yawn and followed suit. Sav checked the time, and we were surprised to see that we'd somehow already spent an hour on board, and midnight was rapidly approaching. Mark made some dumb remark about time flying when you're having fun, and told us to plan to wake up at 7 so we could start exploring the upper levels. Julian and Maria slipped into their room as Savannah helped pull Mark up, and the two of them wished me good night before retreating to their bunk. I closed my door behind me and thought to myself that this was a pretty awesome last hurrah before turning in for the night. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Mark knocking on my door. Hey Eli, wake up man, it's nearly 7:30. We managed to get the water and stove running in the galley, oatmeal and bacon for breakfast if you're hungry. I rolled over and checked my phone. I hadn't bothered to set an alarm, but I figured I wouldn't have slept so well as to sleep in. I groggily rolled out of bed and got dressed for the day before joining the others in the galley. Maria greeted me with a sly smile. Morning, idiot. Couldn't sleep. No, I slept too well. Usually I can't sleep on boats. The rocking bothers me too much. Savannah put down her instant coffee and rolled her eyes at me. Well, we're not on a boat, Eli. There's not going to be any rocking. This thing is bolted to the sea floor. Julian put up his hand, taking a second to chew and swallow before interjecting. No, that's just shallow rigs. Deep water rigs like this are tensioned to the ocean floor with cables, so they're still pretty sturdy, but they do float and rock a bit. So why didn't we feel any rocking last night? Julian shrugged. The sea must have been pretty calm all night, I guess. Mark scoffed. No way, dude. You felt how windy it was when we went out there. This thing would have been rocking like crazy if it wasn't bolted all the way down. Julian sat, brow furrowed for a second before shrugging and returning to his food. We all finished up our breakfast, and Savannah returned to their room to grab her camera while we prepared to leave the quarters. As we stepped out into the salty morning air, the daylight washed the rig in a radiant glow. It was incredible how different it looked in the daytime, the yellow structure towering past the narrow catwalk leading away from the living area. I looked down beneath the grated floor beneath me and noted that the waves seemed much more intense this morning than they had last night, crashing against the gargantuan structure sinking beneath their depths. I still didn't feel any rocking. As much as Mark typically acted a de facto leader of sorts, there was a silent understanding that at least for today, we followed Julian. He knew the ins and outs of a place like this, and we'd be way less likely to get lost if we stayed close. He led us around the catwalk, towards the stairs that would take us to the upper levels. Savannah stopped us what seemed like every 20 feet to get another picture of the rig, and as much as I wanted to be annoyed, I couldn't blame her. We'd entered dozens of brutalist structures before, but the rig took the cake for the most striking. Outside the crew quarters, every fastener served a purpose. Nothing wasted on form, over function. Platforms hung suspended in the air above our heads, utility sections that would normally be hidden from view, intertwined, and encompassing the limited areas designated for human use. As she stopped to take a photo of one of the platforms ahead of us, Savannah froze in place before lowering her camera and gesturing for us to hold still. Guys, do you see that? We looked to where she indicated, and sure as day there was a security camera aimed right at us. My head immediately began to swivel around wildly, searching for any other cameras we may have missed. As Savannah, Maria, and I slowly started panicking, Mark began to laugh at us. "I noticed those last night too," Mark said with a shit-eating grin. "I flipped out too." Julian was kind enough to wait 5 minutes before explaining that they're not broadcasting anywhere off-site. They're wired in directly to the on-site systems. Julian leaned smugly against the rails. "You could have at least let them freak out about it for a few more seconds, man. Would have been hilarious." Savannah rolled her eyes and playfully punched Mark in the shoulder as she passed him on the stair. By the time we finished exploring the middle deck, it was nearly 9. We paused for a while to look out into the open sea. After a while, Maria coughed, an attempt to snag our attention. "So, I don't want to sidetrack anything we're doing, but are we going to check out the signal or what?" "What signal?" I asked. Savannah and Mark looked equally confused. Julian's face soured, and I caught him nudging her arm, as if she had brought up something sensitive. She shot him an incredulous look before continuing. "It's just, well, before we went to bed last night, Jewel was telling me that—" I said it was probably nothing. Drop it. Julian nearly snapped at her. I stood up straight from the railing I'd been leaning against, attempting to place myself closer between the two. "No, go on, Maria. What was he telling you?" She looked nervous, like a puppy backed into a corner. "Well, it's just that he said that there was a signal that was being broadcast to the radio in the control room. He saw the oscilli something showing a reading, but the audio must have been turned off. I was under the impression he must have told you." Mark arose from his resting place as well, also moving towards Julian. His laid-back visage was quickly shed, replaced with a burning red anger. "And you didn't bring this up, why? If someone knows we're here, we could be seriously screwed, you and your girlfriend included. That must have been, 10 hours ago?" Julian backed away from the two of us, as Savannah put her hand on Mark's shoulder. "Babe, he probably just didn't think about that. It's fine. We'll go check it out." "And if it's not? If we end up in prison because we agreed to let Maria and this jack-off tag along?" I turned to Mark. "Whoa, man. Maria's the one who just let us know. Leave her out of this." Julian, caught in the middle between Mark and I, stepped back and towards Maria. Whoa, guys. Calm down. I didn't mean anything by it. I saw the oscilloscope. I saw that it looked like it had been running a while, and I saw that the audio wasn't turned on. Signals come and go from these places all the time, regardless if anyone's here. I didn't bring it up because I thought it would be fun to show you guys today, that's all, swear." Mark pointed a large, angry finger into Julian's chest. "You're going to take us up there right now and show us that signal. And if there's even one hint of trouble for us, you can bet your ass the cops or the Coast Guard or whoever shows up will know just who it was that broke us in here." Julian led the way back up to the control room at the top of the rig. It was several levels higher than where we'd been prior, and reminded me of a fire watch tower overlooking the whole of the structure. Mark pulled the ring of keys from his pocket, but Julian reminded him of last night's handiwork. He pushed the door open easily. The handle had already been destroyed by the bolt cutters. As we collectively entered the control room, it was immediately clear that this was the most advanced facility we'd seen yet. On the wall to our left, broadcasting equipment covered the entire half of the room, wires running in and out of plugs, long deactivated monitors dispersed throughout the tangled mass of cords. The wall immediately across from us consisted only of a large window, splashed and stained with dried sea salt. Outside, the window overlooked a crane that jutted out from the platform, its cable dangling far down into the murky water of the moon pool below us, concealing what lay at the end. On the wall to our right, a small metal desk lay covered in documents, while a massive control panel to its side glittered with shimmering indicators and buttons. Julian made his way over to the broadcasting station and indicated to a small green display. Sure enough, a sound wave bounced along the screen, a signal of some sort making its way to the device while no output could be heard. "Well, find a way to turn the sound on," Mark implored. I could hear the thinly veiled curiosity poorly hidden behind the guise of anger. Julian searched for a moment before seemingly finding the correct knob. He turned it, and as he did, the audio signal began to play through the speakers. The sound of rushing water could clearly be heard, the slosh echoing and distorted. See? I told you it was no big deal. Just some microphone attached to the structure down at the surface. As soon as the words left Julian's mouth, a voice began to cry out through the signal. It was grainy and distorted, as though the microphone recording was too close and too old. Oh God, it worked. You're there. Please, you have to hurry. I need help. We sat frozen where we stood for several seconds, not knowing what to say. Maria cautiously approached the console, finding the closest thing that looked like a microphone, and began to speak into it. Hello? Who is this? Why do you need help? The voice cracked to life once more, this time louder and more difficult to make out. Yes, I need help. Underneath the... We can't hear you. The signal is too distorted. Slow down. Where are you? Underneath the rig, in the sub-facility. You'll need to take the lander. It's in the moon pool. Please. The chamber I'm stuck in is slowly filling up with water. I have hours left at most. You need to come and activate the pumps. They're down here, but I'm locked out. Please hurry. We all looked at each other for a moment. Was this some sort of joke? What sub-facility? Savannah grabbed the microphone from Maria. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Did you say you were nearby the oil rig? Are you in a submarine or something? No, I told you I'm underneath the rig. The rig is a farce. The real facility is under the water. You can get here via the lander. I think it's the blue button, right next to the desk behind you. Please hurry. The audio cut off suddenly. We sat there in silence for about 2 minutes before I spoke up. We should try to help, shouldn't we? Mark looked at me like I was insane. Help? Help who? The mystery man who claims to be under the water? In a facility under an oil rig that no one's visited in a decade? Be serious, Elijah. This is clearly some sort of hoax. Savannah leaned against the desk, putting her head in her hands. I don't know, Mark. Whoever that was sounded pretty scared. Maybe this is legit? I looked across the room. Sure enough, on the panel next to the desk, a square blue button sat out amongst the rest. Underneath it, in black lettering, read the words, Submersible Lander. From my research, a type of underwater elevator. As Mark and Savannah argued about the legitimacy of the signal, I walked over to the panel. Maria stood next to me, and as I saw the fear in her eyes, I knew she believed the mysterious voice just as much as I had. I pressed the button. A klaxon alarm sounded throughout the whole rig, interrupting the argument behind me. Julian, who had stepped over to the window, called out, Hey, everyone might want to look at this. My rig definitely didn't have one of these. As we made our way over to the window, we watched as the crane rapidly reeled in its seemingly infinite supply of cable. Suddenly, from down below, we heard an enormous splashing sound, followed by a thud and a click that echoed through the rest of the structure. We quickly descended the stairs, exiting the control room, and Julian rushed ahead of us, beckoning for us to follow him to the lowest platform. As I made my way down the last flight of stairs, my breath was taken away as the lander came into view. Its rusted exterior was encrusted with sea moss and barnacles. It was mounted to the pillars that descended into the moon pool below, seemingly functioning as an elevator shaft for the hidden transport. The cable that ran from the top to the crane up above was taut and tangled with all manner of sea plants. Printed in bold white lettering, partially rusted over and peeling but still legible, were the words W&H Submersible Facility, Level 0001. As we stood there awestruck, Savannah noticed a large red button on a pedestal next to the lander on the platform in front of us. Almost as if by instinct, she reached out and pressed it, and the doors of the lander slid open before us. Remarkably, it was entirely dry on the inside, with no hints of leakage anywhere to be seen. There were 3 rows of 5 seats each, arranged facing inwards towards the center of the lander. It was embarrassingly long before anyone had the courage to speak. Whatever was down there, whoever was down there, was seemingly real. This was an entire portion of this facility that we weren't prepared for, maybe even the majority of the facility. But someone needed our help, right? I swallowed hard and asked my friends, So, are we getting in? As the doors to the lander sealed behind us, I sat down nervously on the pristine metal seat directly across the interior. The bulky box was robust, and although serviceable, its design far favored utility over comfort. We sat in the dark for only a brief second as the overhead lights buzzed on. As they did, I turned to look over to Maria, who sat between Julian and I. Fearful tears ran down her face as she trembled. It hadn't taken much deliberation for us to decide we all should go down. The lander was clearly watertight, and if we got down to the bottom and decided that we weren't in a position to go on further, a control panel mounted to the door guaranteed we had the option to return to the surface at any time. Mark had suggested that maybe only a couple of us descended into the depths, but Savannah had pointed out that splitting up in an unknown situation like this was a far worse idea. It's not like we had long to deliberate anyhow. The voice on the broadcast had told us we didn't have any time to lose. A rumble. I felt the taut cord holding us up slack for a moment, dropping us maybe a few centimeters before I felt us begin to slowly lower. Maria let out a whimper, gripping Julian's arm as though she never intended to let go. Mark only winced, while Savannah seemed to almost be enjoying herself. After a few seconds, the cold rattle surrounding us stopped, and I felt the metal wall I'd rested my back against slowly turn cold to the touch. We had descended below the surface. No one spoke a word for the duration of the descent. The gravity of our situation wasn't lost on any of us. We had illegally trespassed on what was evidently some sort of hidden facility. If we had opted to ignore the voice, to choose not to try and help, then we either willingly let someone die to protect ourselves, or risked him surviving just to rat us out for being here, or worse. For the sake of our own skins and consciences, we had to do this, right? After several minutes, another jolt, and the submersible shuddered, groaning as it found a resting place. I felt the floor beneath my feet shift, as external locks docked our pod to some unseen structure below. Suddenly, a voice rang from the small PA speaker mounted in the corner of the room. It was grainy and warped as before, but the words could still be made out. All right, perfect. I knew you guys would come. Your capsule is connected to the facility systems now, so I can wire in and guide you to me, without having to depend on the radio transmitter. Here in a few minutes, the docking portal will finish its sealing process, and the porthole will open in the middle of the floor in front of you. Careful, the ladder down will be slippery. Mark stood up out of his seat. Who are you? We're coming down to help if we can, but we need to know what we're getting into. What is this place? There was about 30 seconds of silence from the system, before the voice hummed to life once more. I should mention, there's no microphones on your guy's end, so I can't hear a word you're saying. There'll be cameras throughout the facility, so I can make sure you're heading the right direction. I'm going to make a guess, however, and say you're probably wondering who I am. I'll be honest, I don't have a satisfying answer for you yet, but I promise to explain everything I can when you get here. Good luck. Julian stood up suddenly. Nope, no way we're going any further with this weird shit. I didn't sign up for this. None of us did. I don't trust whoever the hell is talking to us, and neither should any of you. He moved to press the button that would return us to the surface, but before he could, an aperture opened in the middle of the room, trickling water slowly down into a hatch with a ladder. Julian rolled his eyes and pressed the button anyways. A buzzer beeped and an automated voice rang out from the PA above. Warning, unable to return to surface at this time. Please detach from dock at sublevel 01. Surfacing will then commence after depressurization process completes. Estimated time to depressurization, 28 hours. Savannah stood up out of her chair. Wait, 28 hours? It took us 5 minutes to get down here. What do you mean 28 hours? I winced. It's the pressure, I muttered. The deeper we go, the more time our bodies need to adjust before coming back up. I should have thought of this before. So what, we just wait? Savannah snapped. If we go up too fast... I swallowed. Our blood starts to boil. Mark turned to me. That's a pretty big deal to just forget, man. If it's going to take a whole day and change just to go back up, that only leaves us 10 hours to go and get this guy and come back before the pilot swings back around. We definitely don't have enough food and water to last the extra week before his next try round. Maria stood out of her seat and quickly walked over to the ladder to begin her descent. We all sat looking at her for a moment before she spoke. Well, if we only have 10 hours, we'd better hurry. Come on. We each made the descent into the chamber at the bottom of the ladder. I was the last one down, and as I reached the floor below our feet, I examined our surroundings. We seemed to be at the end of a circular hallway. At the end, a set of stairs descended about 5 feet where a platform sat, and a bulkhead door waited for us. Mark, Savannah, and Maria had already begun to walk down the hall. As Julian turned to follow them, I grabbed his shoulder with my hand. Hey, Jewel, we need to talk real quick. Now? We don't exactly have a lot of time. Make it quick. I let his shoulder go, and he turned to face me, his expression full of annoyance. Look, I don't think any of us want to be down here. This was supposed to be a fun trip, and now we're actually in some real potential danger. Yeah, no shit, dude. I didn't know that any of this was here. I'm in the same boat as you. I thought this was a normal rig like the one I was on. I know you do. That's why we brought you here, remember? You were only allowed to come because you were useful, because you'd be able to pull your weight. But we're not in your territory anymore, so you have a different job now. Oh yeah? What's that, asshole? As long as we are down here, keeping Maria safe is your only priority. If shit hits the fan and I'm not able to protect her, I need you to swear with your life that you'll put her first. He softened, the anger on his face slowly washing away. Yeah, man, of course. Same goes to you, though. Of course. I'm glad we have an understanding. We quickly caught up to the rest of the group, who had made their way down the stairs and had opened the bulkhead door, separating us from the rest of the facility. As we passed through, the overhead lights buzzed softly, casting long, flickering shadows. The air smelled old, damp, metallic. Somewhere deeper in the structure, I could hear the low hum of machinery, the steady churn of something big operating beneath our feet. We stood at the bottom of the access stairs just past the bulkhead door. The passage ahead waited eagerly for us. Mark turned in a slow circle, his flashlight sweeping over the walls. Okay, there's no way that generator up top is running all this. Julian frowned, listening. Yeah, no chance. Maria glanced between them. Wait, what do you mean? Julian exhaled, shifting his pack. I mean, what we got running last night should have barely been enough for emergency light and heat. That thing's been sitting for years. Mark crossed his arms. We figured it was a long shot, that even if we got it on, we weren't sure how long it'd last. Offshore rigs usually run on diesel, which doesn't go bad the same way gas does, so we hoped there was a chance the reserves would last long enough for our trip. Thought we got lucky. He gestured vaguely at the hall ahead. This? This is way beyond that. Maria blinked. But then where's the power coming from? Savannah raised an eyebrow. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say something down here. Julian exhaled through his nose, looking down the corridor. Has to be something bigger, another power source. Something bigger. That phrase sat heavy in the air. Maria hesitated, then took a small step closer to me. So, is that bad? Nobody answered. Savannah grinned, sharp. Only one way to find out. She turned and kept walking. The rest of us hesitated, then followed. We walked for maybe 100 feet or so before a fork appeared in our path. The passageway opened into a larger chamber, where 3 hallways split off in different directions. A rusted sign bolted to the wall labeled them Sub-Level Maintenance, left, Primary Research Wing, right, Habitation and Offices, straight. Where to, mystery man? Julian muttered, looking around for a speaker or intercom. As if in response, an intercom in the corner of the room sputtered to life. The words were harder to make out than before, distorted and echoing. Whatever he was saying, it sounded intense, as though his message was urgent. Savannah tilted her head. Do any of you understand what he's saying? I can't make it out. The garbled speech cut out intermittently, and we stood puzzled, waiting for clarity on our direction. Amidst the static nonsense, my ear caught just one word. Right. You guys heard that too? Sounded like he said to go right. Mark furrowed his brow and peered down the corridor leading to our right. Primary research, huh? Wonder if the poor bastard got stuck monitoring data. Maria lit up suddenly and pointed towards the floor leading into the research wing. Look, guys, footprints. Savannah pulled a flashlight out of her bag and illuminated the ground ahead. Indeed, tracks of briny water were faintly visible on the floor. They were difficult to make out in the dim lighting, but it appeared that whoever left them had been rushed, as several amorphous tracks weaved in and out of each other. As the we traced the trail of water out of the hall, the path curved around, ending abruptly against the wall next to the hallway entrance. Shit, looks like maybe he's been here recently. Julian shone his own flashlight, peering down each of the hallways. I sighed. All of his tracks seemed to be coming or going from research. Plus, he said, right? Yeah, I think so. So right we go. The research wing stretched out ahead, a dim, branching corridor lined with rusted pipes and corroded archways. The lights flickered more erratically than before, casting our warped shadows across the walls. The air was damp and stale, and something faint reeked the further we went in. We followed the water trail cautiously, our footsteps echoing against the steel floor. Somewhere behind the walls, machinery groaned and hummed, a constant torrent of noise that assaulted my ears and tightened our pace. Anyone else feel like we're walking into a damn haunted house? Julian muttered. Yeah, Mark said, except you're not actually in danger inside a haunted house. Savannah snorted. Tell that to the idiot in a clown mask who accidentally punched me last year. Maria said nothing, her eyes darting nervously between the bolted doors we passed. The research wing had the feel of something abandoned hastily. In the few open doors, we could see chairs knocked over, papers scattered on the floor, monitors flickering and displaying readouts I couldn't even begin to understand. A burst of static crackled through a nearby intercom, making all of us jump. The voice was still completely unintelligible, static, and the growing sound of rushing water still drowning out meaningful speech. But the emotion behind it was far stronger, more desperate than before. Panic. I do not... As it cut once more, we all exchanged glances. What's he trying to say? Maria whispered. No clue. Is he hurt? Mark asked. Savannah shook her head. I don't know. He sounded frantic, scared. I swallowed, my throat dry. He said something about right before, but now he's saying, do not, Julian finished. His voice was tight. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. The air felt heavier now, pressing in on my skin, making it harder to breathe. Mark pointed ahead. Looks like the water tracks continue up ahead, into that big door. Let's at least check it out before we decide to turn back. I wasn't sure we even had the option to turn back at this point, so onwards we went. It took 3 of us to open the massive door at the end of the hallway. As we breached its threshold, we found ourselves in an enormous, cavernous room. It looked like a central hub for the research wing, a vast circular chamber with multiple exits leading off in different directions. The ceiling stretched at least 50 feet above us, lined with hanging cables and pipes. The walls were filled with observation decks, consoles, and what looked like vats, filled with an inky blue ichor. The entire room had a sickly, rotting smell to it, the odor causing me to cover my nose upon entry. Condensation dripped from the ceiling, and the entirety of the floor was slippery with water. By far, though, most striking feature was the pit in the center of the room. Taking up almost the entirety of the floor, a gaping maw descended impossibly deep, only muted darkness visible further down. Its sides weren't plated steel, but solid, jagged rock. It dawned on me that this level of the facility must be mounted to the ocean floor, this cavernous hole bored directly into the seabed. The pit was surrounded entirely by robust guardrails, and snaking coils and wires rose from the darkness below, feeding into sensors and monitors all around the central rotunda. Hundreds of clear, pulsating tubes appeared to be siphoning the same blue liquid from the depths, slowly filling the vats in the room with the stuff. Mark whistled. Jesus! Maria inched closer to the pit's edge, peering down. How deep do you think it goes? Julian shook his head. No idea, but I don't like that we can't see the bottom. Whatever's down there absolutely stinks, though. I moved toward the railing, gripping the cold metal, and squinted into the void. There was something about the way the cables draped into the abyss, like fishing lines waiting to pull something up. I stood staring into the void, and out of the corner of my eye I saw Maria, Julian, and Mark step away. "We'll check this side of the room," Mark called. "See if there's anything useful in those offices." It made me nervous to split up, but they were only on the other side of the pit. "Guess that leaves us the left," Savannah said, nudging my arm. "Come on." I hesitated, my gaze lingering on the pit. A part of me wanted to walk away from it, to ignore the gnawing sense of unease clawing at my chest. As I let go of the rail and turned to follow Savannah, something caught my eye. A movement in the depths. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The darkness down there was thick, suffocating, shifting slightly like fog over still water. But as I stared, I realized there was something in it. Something moving, something rising. A shape, massive and sinuous, uncoiled from the depths like a snake. My breath caught in my throat as it breached the surface. A colossal, inky black limb, studded with glistening malformed sores and riddled with thick pulsating tubes, sucking the blue substance from its mottled veins. A tentacle, writhing and frantic. And it was reaching for Maria. I opened my mouth to scream, but the noise barely escaped my throat. My body locked in place, frozen in horror as the thing lashed forward. She barely had time to react. As she started to turn, eyes wide, mouth parting, then the tentacle struck. It coiled around her torso, squeezing tight with an awful wet crunch before yanking her off her feet. The air escaping her body warped her final scream, twisting it into a lifeless groan. The sound echoed, sharp and raw, as she was dragged beneath the pit's edge. Julian lunged forward, grabbing her outstretched arm, but the force was too strong. His fingers slipped, and she was pulled into the abyss. There was only silence, and she was gone. I stumbled back, heart hammering. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out the horrified shouts of the others. Savannah gripped my arm in a vice-like hold. Then, as suddenly as the tentacle had appeared, a blue flash filled the room, arising from the pit below. The whole chamber was flooded with it, a pulsing glow that lasted less than a second. It wasn't light, not exactly, more like a ripple in the air, a distortion that moved through the room. The air shimmered, thickening like a pressure wave before vanishing. The flash was the least of my focus, however, and I began to run, tears uncontrollably streaming down my face as I struggled to make haste towards where Julian and Mark were. "You promised me you'd protect her. I'll kill you. I swear I'll kill you." I approached the other side of the pit, stopping to wipe my eyes between sobs. As I looked towards the two of them with clarity in my vision, they stood, gawking at me as though I was crazy. Between them, Maria was back, standing exactly where she had been a moment before. "Dude, what the hell are you on about? Calm down." I stumbled forward, gasping for air, my mind reeling. I had just seen her die. I had seen her dragged into the depths. I had heard the breath squeezed out of her lungs, but here she was, alive. "Eli," Maria frowned at me. "What's wrong?" I stared at her, chest heaving. You were..." A deep, hollow sound rumbled from the pit, and I saw Julian's eyes widen. I whipped around just in time to see the tentacle rise again, exactly as before. But this time, all of our eyes were locked on it. Exactly as before, the limb writhed with malice, before curling its slimy end and extending towards my sister. Before it could reach her, though, Julian braced himself, shoving her out of its path. As she fell to the side, the appendage recalculated, grabbing Julian instead. His strangled cry tore through the room as the thing yanked him off the ground, squeezing his chest with enough force I heard his ribs crunch under the pressure. His eyes bulged, locked onto mine as the tentacle ripped him away, disappearing like lightning into the dark. In the panic, I realized that Mark and Savannah had already taken off, attempting to run to the door and slipping in their step on the wetted floor. I stooped down, reaching to pick up Maria, who was dazed on the ground. She was soaked in the salty, slime-tinged water covering the floor. As I got her to her feet, the others had made it to the door and were holding it open, screaming for us to hurry up and make it through. Through Maria's wails, I managed to put her arm over my shoulders and helped her stumble towards the door. Mark and Savannah had crossed back into the hallway, and I shoved Maria through the doorway before I went through. As I rushed to close the door behind me, another blue flash shot through the room. I turned, just in time to see Julian standing in the exact same spot as he had before, now alone, his expression one of sheer terror as the tentacle reached for him again. The door slammed shut between us, and the last thing I heard was his scream cut off with a blood-curdling snap. Mark held Savannah in his arms as she trembled, and Maria sat collapsed, inconsolable heap on the floor. We didn't have time to wait, though. We could stop when we'd made it to safety. I pulled her up, and we began to run back through the hallway from which we'd came. It only took a few minutes before we reached the junction from earlier, and we let ourselves stop. Savannah hyperventilated as Mark ran his fingers through her hair, his eyes wide as he stared blankly into the research hall. Maria sat against a wall, choking with every breath as tears streamed between sobs. The intercom crackled to life, the words finally audible again. "No, no, 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 no. I told you not to go right. I told you not to go that way." I drowned out the incessant noise from the speaker and collapsed with my back against the wall. I stared blankly at the trail of water which had led us into the research wing, the trail that curled towards the wall and ended in the spot where my sister now sat crying. The previous tenant left a survival guide. The flat isn't new anymore, and I need a better guide. It's been a long time since I moved into this apartment, picked up that damn note from the tenant before me, and unlocked a world of demon window cleaners and vile rat-like creatures that live in the communal lift. If you don't know me, my name is Kat, and months ago I found myself living in a home filled with unusual occurrences. You can start here if you want to know more. If any of you do remember me, I'm back again, begging for your help. I don't even really know how to begin this, but I think I owe you all an apology. You warned me, gave me advice, and tried to stop me from making the biggest damn mistake of my life. I didn't listen. Instead, I let my emotional immaturity get the better of me. I really wish I'd listened. I'm sorry I ghosted you all. I was embarrassed. I know I disappeared without a word, and for that I really am sorry. I can't blame any of you for comparing me to Prudence. The events following my moving into the block had me in such an emotional place. You have to understand, it was a lot to take in. No one can be truly equipped to live somewhere like this. It was bound to catch up with me eventually. The months since I last updated you have been hellish, and now I've found myself in further trouble. It wasn't long after my last post that I caught Jamie. I enticed him into the flat with cat food left out by the door. I ran the risk of being mauled alive by the remaining lift creatures to capture my monstrosity of a boyfriend. He was smaller than I thought. I expected him to be much larger than Lila because of the age difference, but he wasn't. Maybe as big as a large dog. Something I missed about Jamie more than anything was his once huge stature. An odd quality to consider, I know. But he was 6'3", and his cuddles felt like the safest place I'd ever been. Looking at the small, deformed, humanoid creature, hunched over, crunching on cat biscuits with its sharp, jagged teeth, tucked under a grotesque rodent nose, made me feel sick. I instantly knew that I'd made a mistake, that the love of my life was gone for good. But that thing had Jamie's eyes. They were unmistakable. Suddenly, Prudence's need to keep Lila around made sense. I could see an entire life in those eyes that had been ripped away from me, and I was too selfish to let it go. I suppose in that respect I'm exactly like her, exactly what you all think, a monster. I fashioned a place to keep him hidden in the large, built-in wardrobe of our bedroom. It wasn't like Lila's cage was, cold and restricted. It had space, lights, and photos of us before everything happened. It was like a walk-in wardrobe. Ironically, it was something that originally attracted me to the flat. The only similarity to Lila's tiny cage was the large padlock that secured it. I tried everything to bring that little piece of Jamie left inside the creature out. I really did. I sat with him for hours, talking about our lives, reminiscing and trying to feed him his favorite meals. He would make awful raspy noises when I spoke to him at first, grunting and wheezing as if he were struggling to breathe. I received more than a few bites and scratches, and he refused to eat anything that I gave him, opting for scraps instead. I thought about killing him. A lot. It's a position I never thought I'd be in when we were searching for a home together, and at some point I realized I consider it daily. I've come close to attempting it more than a few times, but every time I look at those damn eyes, I can't. I'm weak. So I've tried to cope. I've taken the best care of him that I can. I've gotten involved with my neighbors. I babysat Terry's twins twice a week at her place while she slept, and I'm actively involved in the residence committee. I never told anyone what I did, aside from all of you. There's only two people I feel I could admit my mistakes to. One was locked in my wardrobe, whilst the other was seemingly gone forever. Despite this, I kept the garden immaculate in the hope that one day Derek would return, and it kept me sane. I even managed to revive one of the shrubs that Prudence tried to butcher during her attack, but no matter how much love I gave, it just wouldn't flourish, and the bench remained empty. All this whilst I kept my deepest shame in my bedroom cupboard. Regardless of all the anguish this place has brought me, there's nowhere else in the world I would consider home anymore. I've never felt more connected to a place in my life. So I've stayed, I've coped, and I kept busy. The tower block may be special, and its residents may often live in another world, but we weren't completely immune to the outside. Government lockdown hit us recently too. With lockdown came the loss of routine as we knew it. The whole building went into chaos, and I was no exception. Being trapped in the flat with him all day undid months' worth of self-distraction and denial in a matter of hours. I'd never been more aware of what an abhorrent thing I'd done than those first few weeks. The other residents were going through their own crises. Terry hadn't slept in weeks. We FaceTimed regularly, and I missed her and the kids terribly. Every time I spoke to her, she looked awful. There was wailing at night, banging at all hours of the day, and a whole building's worth of inhabitants struggling. When they deemed window cleaning non-essential, it sent that particular pest into chaos. He still appeared on the balconies, but instead of the relentless niceties, he just scratched desperately at the window. I tried not to open the curtains I finally got round to buying a few months ago. I couldn't take his pleading eyes. The residence committee tried to put things in place to keep the block going. We were running Zoom meetings, and a number of us started collecting essentials for the elderly and vulnerable residents of our floors, having socially distanced chats with them from the corridor as we drop off. To be honest, it was as much a lifeline for me as the elderly residents. Anything to get out of the flat, away from him. I was allocated 3 residents from my floor living in flats 48, 51, and 43. Percy and Sylvia live in flat 43. They're next door to me and generally very pleasant. Sylvia has a breathing problem, so they had to isolate. They're older but very independent. Most of the time they just needed a few essentials and didn't want to chat. Mr. Prentice from flat 48 was easy too. He'd been an intensely private man since I'd known him, and lockdown hadn't changed that. He did seem to make more of the animalistic noises I'd come to know him for, but I think being trapped inside would do that to anyone with his particular afflictions. Since he trampled Prudence, I'd been much more tolerant of the sounds anyway. The only thing I really learned about him from doing his shopping is that he loves a drink, and there's often a bottle of whiskey in the bag he carries home with his newspaper inside. Once a week he asked me to drop off an envelope of cash to the pub he drinks in, the Pickled Gnome. He said that the owner is a good friend, and he worries about her getting by financially with the pub shut at the moment. It warmed my heart. He's such a lovely man. Flat 51 was different from the other two. I hadn't ever met the occupant, despite having lived here for almost a year now. I'd seen a young man going in and out occasionally, but he never stayed long. The flat was occupied by Miss Esther Beckman, a blind elderly widow. The man visiting was her son, who had his own profoundly disabled child and couldn't support his mother through the pandemic. The first time I knocked on her door, I was nervous. I wasn't sure why, I just felt uncomfortable trying to help someone I knew nothing about. I knocked and stood back. It took a few moments for Miss Beckman to answer. Esther had wild grayed hair. She hadn't cut it like most older ladies tend to. She'd allowed it to grow, and it had formed spectacular waves. She was well presented, and I'm embarrassed to say I didn't expect that from a blind person. She wore a satin blue dressing gown over the top of a white day dress and had a pair of comfortable-looking slippers on that perfectly matched the color of her dressing gown. "Are you the girl Molly phoned about?" I told her I'm fine, but the interfering old bat insisted. She greeted me with rummaging in the pocket of her dressing gown for a packet of cigarettes. I watched her open the pack and light the last one. Her brash attitude didn't put me off. I liked people with a bit of tenacity, and I wasn't particularly fond of the Residence Committee's chairperson, Molly Thompson, either. "I'm Kat, although I'm sure Molly will have referred to me as Catherine, not my name, by the way. Anyway, I'm happy to pick up anything that you need, and I'm here if you just want to chat." I stumbled a little as I spoke. Esther laughed. "See, even interfering in something as personal as your name. I never liked that woman." She paused and took a few drags of her cigarette, hesitating before she continued. "I don't need much. If you could grab me a pack of cigarettes and a microwave meal every day, I'm fine. I don't like to ask, but my son can't come, and without a smoke, I think I'd go potty." She took another long drag of her cigarette and reached into her pocket to pull out some change and a 20-pound note. She winced a little as she asked for help. It clearly wasn't something she was used to. "Throw me the packet so I know which brand to get," I answered. Esther threw me the empty carton after shoving her money inside, and I barely caught it. She smoked the same brand I did, so I reached into my pocket and pulled out 3 or 4 individual cigs and tossed them back. They hit the floor. Shit. She's blind, I thought, mortified. "There's a few cigs on the floor in front of you." "Sorry." I didn't think. "But they're the same as yours. They should keep you going until I get back." As I said that, she smiled properly for the first time. "You're all right, aren't you? Thanks. Before you go, just a bit of advice for you. Take the route through the park instead of round." She answered. I thought it was strange, but everything in the tower was. I told her that I would and said my goodbyes. The stairs that constantly skipped weren't kind to me that trip. The 7 flights became 18, and by the time I reached the bottom, my thighs were burning. I exited the building and thought about Esther's suggestion. The route around the park was quicker, but I decided a pleasant wander through the trees would only keep me away from Jamie for longer. So without any further hesitation, I took her advice. My legs were sore from the stairs, but it was a beautiful day. About halfway through the park, I heard a loud crash and the screeching of car tires, followed by screaming. I sped up, and when I finally reached the exit, I turned the corner towards the shop and the source of the noise. It was utter carnage. A car had slammed into a motorbike at a zebra crossing and caused a devastating accident. Crowds gathered, with multiple people on the phone to emergency services. I was shaken entering the shop. I couldn't stop thinking about the poor people involved in the crash. Esther's words echoed in my mind as I thought about the fact that had I taken the usual route, I would have probably been crossing at the crash site as it happened. The realization that Ms. Beckman's suggestion had saved my life sent my mind into overdrive. I know that many of you think I learned nothing from my experiences moving into the block, but I did learn that there are no coincidences here. She had known exactly what was going to happen. I left the shop and chose to go back through the park. I was leaving nothing to chance, but it frustrated me that I couldn't get back home quicker. When I reached the building, I flung the main door open and started to climb the stairs. They must have sensed my urgency, because they only made me climb 4 flights this time. I stared at the numbers on the flat door. 51. Why had I never met her before? Why had she been hiding in her flat? I placed the shopping bag close to the door, rapped hard on it with my knuckles, and shouted, "Ms. Beckman." A few moments passed. I knocked again. "Give me a chance to open the door, Kat. And please, it's Essie. Or would you prefer I called you Catherine?" She opened the door and replied, scoffing as she said Catherine. "How did you know?" I demanded. "Know what?" "You know what? You saved my life. The crash." "I didn't save your life. I knew that if you walked around the park, you'd be in trouble. I had no idea there would be a crash. I just made a suggestion. You saved your own life when you took it," she said flippantly. So you can see the future? I asked, desperate for answers. Don't you dare! Blind woman. Second sight. My whole life, the residents of this block have tried to reduce me to a walking cliché, and I'm not doing it anymore. I don't see anything. I've been blind since birth. I've just always had a particularly accurate instinct. She spoke with passion. I could see why she locked herself away. If the other residents knew about her talents, I'm sure she was hounded. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I haven't been here long. These things still surprise me. Thank you for sharing your instinct. I would have been squished if you didn't. Well, I'm glad you weren't. She reached down and picked up the shopping bag, taking out the packet of cigarettes to open and light one. Thanks for this, she said, rustling the bag with her fingers. What flat do you live in? Number 42, I answered. Essie beamed. I overheard someone saying that the old witch was dead, but I wasn't sure I believed them. I thought Prudence Hemmings would ride out a nuclear apocalypse like the cockroach she was. I cringed at the sound of her name. I try not to think about her too much, or what she put me through. I try to focus on what I love about the block. Essie could tell she struck a nerve. Did I hit a sore point? She continued, noting my discomfort. I wasn't a fan of Prudence either. The idea of her coming back with cockroach antennae in the night will keep me awake now, I answered, trying to lighten the mood. You're funny. If Antenna would have benefited that woman, she'd have done anything to grow them. It's nice to have some young blood in this place. It was all starting to get a bit old and stale. Take care, Kat. We said our goodbyes and she closed the door. That night, I thought about Essie. I imagined introducing her to the twins. I was sure she would love them. And I thought of trying to get her involved in the block again when all this was over. It made me smile. Unfortunately, my happy thoughts were soon interrupted by Jamie. I sat on my bed with a cup of tea and could hear him from the cupboard, scratching and wheezing. I went and opened it up to stroke him a few times. Saliva dripped from his sharp teeth down his deformed jaw. It disgusted me. I shut my eyes and tried to imagine my once gorgeous boyfriend, arms round me on the mattress on the floor of the flat for the one night that we got to spend here together. I wished every day to go back to that, but it would never happen. When I opened my eyes, there he was, that monster. I got close to Essie over those first few weeks. I got her cigarettes and a microwave meal every day, and we chatted at the door. After a few days, I was taking my morning cup of tea to sit in the corridor and talk to her. I started making enough food for two so that she could have something home-cooked. She hated my lasagna, but she was grateful. She had lost her husband young, not long after she had her son, and never dated again. Her life was fascinating. She'd spent years as a social worker before she retired. She said that her instinct helped her give great advice to her clients, and she'd managed to help a lot of people out of bad situations. Essie may have been older, but she was full of life. I asked her why I never saw her, why she never came to committee meetings or got involved. As I suspected, she'd grown sick of the whole block hounding her for predictions about their lives. She told me that once Molly had begged her to tell her the gender of her unborn grandchild before the child's mother had found out so that she could hold it over her. It sounded like it got intense. People were offering to pay for the winning lottery numbers or the bank details of Bill Gates. They didn't want to listen when she tried to tell them that it wasn't how it worked. So she kept a distance, saw her son, and that was about it. It made me sad. I vowed that even after this lockdown was over, I was going to keep spending time with Essie. I didn't want to think of anyone hauled up at home all the time without anyone to talk to. I told Terry about her, and she remembered Essie being friends with her parents while she was growing up. Terry told me she'd been a resident forever. I dropped Essie's shopping at the door and sat down in the corridor to chat as usual one afternoon. We spoke about music and her love of jazz. It was pleasant. Just before I left, she stopped me and told me that she had an instinct that she needed to tell me about. It was unusual. She didn't like to share them, and I didn't like to pester, but she insisted it was important. Kat, one of your friends needs help. You need to know that it is possible. It won't be easy, but if you look hard enough, you will find a way. That was all she said. She claimed it was all she knew, but I think Essie liked to hold things back sometimes. Either way, it was cryptic and confusing. I lamented her for it. That's all you're giving me? What am I supposed to do with that? I quizzed her. Haven't got a fucking clue, she replied, lighting yet another cigarette. I got an instinct, and I told you. What more do you want? There's others in this block that would kill for one of Essie Beckman's famous instincts. She laughed and flipped her wild hair mockingly. I sat in the corridor outside hers for a while, even after she closed the door. I thought about what her instinct could mean. When I finally gathered up the stomach to enter my flat, I thought of Jamie. What if it meant I could help him? What if what I'd done was reversible? What if there was hope? Or maybe it meant that killing him really was the only way I could help him, and if I looked at myself hard enough, I'd finally find the strength to follow through. I struggled to sleep that night despite trying to go to bed early. Every scratch, wheeze, and gasp from the cupboard sent me bolt upright, and it took until just after 1 a.m. before I finally drifted off. When I woke in the morning, I had 5 missed calls from Terry, 2 from 3 a.m., and 3 from that morning. My heart dropped. The kids. I knew Ellie had been going through a stage of trying to get out of the flat, and I was terrified something had happened to her. I could barely hold the phone as I dialed back. Thankfully, she answered quickly. Terry, are you okay? What's happened? Are the kids okay? I practically screamed at her down the microphone. Categoria, I'm fine. We're fine. But I have to tell you something. Terry was serious. She was never serious. What is it? Last night, Ellie got out. She made it all the way up to your floor to try and visit you by the time I caught up with her. As I was about to march her downstairs, I spotted something. It's Ms. Beckman, Kat. She was walking into the lift. Her words cut into my soul. I let out a gentle sob. I'm sorry, Kat. I tried to stop her. I screamed her name, but she didn't turn. She just walked in. I couldn't do any more. I had Ellie there, and when I checked the time, it was 2:15. I'm so sorry. And that's where this predicament begins, in an ironically similar place to before, with me mourning the loss of a loved one to the lift. There's a death row inmate who we've executed over 12 times. He won't stay dead. We killed Joseph Glass for the first time on August 18th, 1999. I knew he was a strange case since day one. Never seen a guy so happy to die before. It was like we were doing him a favor. He refused the automatic appeal. He refused to be seen by a chaplain. He just wanted it over with. It had only taken a little over a year, and it was already time for him to make his appointment with God. He freaked me out just passing by his cell. He was like our very own Hannibal Lecter, the way he just stood there in the back of his cell like he'd been waiting for you. The lights always burned out in any cell he was in, and maintenance had gotten tired of fixing them. Not that he seemed to mind in the slightest. The darkness seemed to swallow his top half, and all I could see were the whites of his beady little eyes poking out of all that black. Billy drummed his baton against the bars. Up and at 'em, cowpoke, he called in that mocking tone. Time finally come for you to pay what you owe, you sick son of a... Billy. Warden Taft silenced him with a word. If you can't act like a professional, you're going to have to sit this one out. Billy paused and licked his chapped lips. Nah, he muttered. This is a show I can't miss. Glass seemed to tick Billy off more than any prisoner before him. He liked him to at least pretend to feel sorry for what they've done, or act scared of what's coming to him. This one didn't even have the common decency to shed a tear. He was as stone-faced as a statue, even while being marched to the chair. Billy liked to joke sometimes that we ought to take the guy out back with some car batteries and really put the fear of God into him, get him to cut out that stoic act. I think he was only half joking. After what this guy did to those girls, well, Billy has a daughter, so I guess it struck a chord. We all watched him fry. The warden, his closest men, the thin-faced man representing the commissioner of corrections, the prison physician, the families of those poor girls. It couldn't have gone more by the book. Only oddity I'd noticed at the time was that the stench of death never quite left the clothes I'd worn that day. And then the next morning, we came into work to see the whites of those beady little eyes staring at us from the darkness again. Good morning, sirs, he said, just as he did every morning in that airy, hoarse little voice. I'll admit it. I dropped everything I was carrying, stumbled back, stammered like a confused child. Hell, I almost screamed. You, you're not, you're supposed to be. I don't know what you mean, sir. He leaned in like he was trying to stare a hole through my chest. His tone almost sounded disappointed. You never came for me. You promised me that yesterday would be the end, sir, but you never came. I waited all night long. Why did you lie to me? Me and Taft looked at each other. We both had the exact same question on our minds. If Glass was still alive, who the hell did we roll into the morgue last night? Jesus Christ, Taft gagged when he pulled back the cadaver cover, stumbling away. It's Billy. I looked. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it. And I'll be forever haunted by the sight of my friend lying there on his back, mouth agape and cloudy eyes staring into the ceiling, open wide as if he'd spent his last moments in a state of terror. The public never found out what happened. The cover-up story was that poor Billy had been taken by cardiac arrest. Internally, it was the scandal to end all scandals. Worst case of incompetence and negligence in history, they called it. They brought the hammer down on anyone even tangentially involved. Me and Taft were out on our ears, and they would have prosecuted us too, but that would have required admitting it ever happened. But I just could never wrap my head around it. Of those dozens of witnesses, not a single person noticed we were strapping a guard to the chair, not an inmate. It was impossible to the point of absurdity. Glass had been the man in that chair. I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. Some months later, I noticed power flickering off all over the city one evening. It was brief, so I thought nothing of it, at least until I got a call from a familiar number the very next morning. I understand you were one of the staff who regularly worked with one Joseph Glass. We would like to consult with you about an evolving situation. Oh. At 7 p.m. yesterday, we attempted the execution of Joseph Glass for the second time. There was a long pause, and when the voice returned, the professionalism had melted away, replaced with a baffled anxiety. And well, it didn't work. I blinked. It didn't... What? There came a long sigh. Perhaps it'd be best if you saw for yourself. And just like that, me and Taft had our jobs back. Officially, Joseph Glass had been successfully executed on August 18, 1999. Unofficially, they'd tried again 6 months later, just to tie up loose ends. This time, he hadn't even had the courtesy to pretend to die. He just sat there on the chair, motionless and unaffected, while the CO who'd flipped the switch suddenly seized up and began to convulse, screaming and gnashing and wailing as electricity seared him beneath his skin, clawing at his chest until his eyes popped in his skull and rolled down his face like melted candle wax. All around him, lights flickering, machines bursting from pressure, electrical panels vomiting arcs of static. It was a mess. The feds were crawling all over this case now from a department I've never heard of. Something about investigating preternatural activity. They told me Glass was refusing to speak with anybody but the COs who'd once cared for him. Being walked into that interrogation room almost made me feel like I, myself, was a convict being marched to his execution. Glass was staring at me when I walked in, like he'd been sat there motionless, waiting for me. I expected nothing less. I took a shuddering breath as I sat across from him. I'd sat across from serial killers and psychos before and showed no hint of fear, but how could I not now sitting across from a man who can kill people without touching them? Glass. Officer Mendez. His tone betrayed no emotion. I had thought you'd abandoned me. I winced. No, Glass. I'd just been temporarily relieved. It's good to see you again. Would you like a glass of water? I offered it to him. He didn't even look at it. His eyes just bored into mine, relentless. I'm here to ask you a few questions. Silence. Okay, Glass, I need to know how you killed Billy and Kramer. I didn't, he replied. It did. It? The thing standing behind you. I didn't bother to turn around. I had enough experience with prisoners trying to trick me into looking the other way while they pulled off some half-baked escape plan. Glass, please, let's take this seriously, I replied. I've always treated you with respect, haven't I? You've never had any problems with me. Actually, I do. I have a problem with all of you. Oh? You here all believe that death is a punishment. There was the first hint of emotion I'd ever heard in his voice. It's not. It's freedom. The only freedom. You promised me that gift. You promised me you'd let me die. You've given it to so many other prisoners while leaving me behind. With all of your machines and your science and your knowledge, surely you can find a way, if anyone. My throat felt suddenly dry. I had to take a sip of the water myself and hoped it would quell my burning nerves. We're trying our best, Glass, but you have to work with us. It may help if you told us what exactly is preventing us from executing you. He moved for the first time, leaning in so slow as to be almost imperceptible. It won't let me die. And that's when I felt a hand settle on my shoulder from behind. Everything stopped. My lungs stopped inflating. I swear my heart stopped beating, and my blood froze in place in my veins, and it all felt so cold. I could see the hand in the corner of my eyes, long and veiny and black. I could feel the breath on the back of my neck. I'd once mocked the way deers froze in headlights. Now I understood. I couldn't move, I couldn't blink, I couldn't think, I couldn't even take a single breath. Even as my lungs began to cry out for air, and my vision blurred, and my thoughts melded together. All I could see was Joseph's eyes staring into mine, those infinite fathoms of darkness, that Stygian sea that swirled and stormed and thundered in the blackness of his iris, and the eyes of things waiting a million leagues below the waters. And I would have suffocated there, too terrified to even breathe, if those agents in black had not called off the interrogation then and come storming into the room. Later they showed me the tapes from the security camera. There'd been nothing behind me, nothing placing its thin hand upon my shoulder, nothing at all. On May 7th, 2001, Glass was set to be executed for the third time, via hanging, or so I heard, in some government black site somewhere, far from prying eyes. While it was set to happen, me and Taft were sharing glasses of scotch in his office, nominally to celebrate. Really, because we were scared. Taft always struck me as young at heart despite his years, but this was the first time the warden had ever looked truly, properly old. He watched the yard below as he had a drink. Did I ever tell you why I chose this line of work, Mendez? I shook my head, and he sighed. Back in '63, they found a woman's body in the back seat of a burnt-out car in some state park near my neighborhood. A prostitute. One of her Johns had chopped her up, burned all the evidence. And you know what got me, Mendez? Nobody cared. Nobody bothered to investigate. Who will notice one less hooker on the corner of Fifth Avenue, right? It didn't sit right with me. The way I see it, Mendez, every life matters. Even the ones we try and cast aside. Everybody's got people who love them, and childhood memories, and all that. Everybody deserves justice, no matter who they were. He set down his glass and looked me in the eyes. So I joined the force, got the case reopened, found the guy, and I watched him fry. And I like to imagine she was there watching too as he burned. There was a tense moment, and then a chuckle. Of course, after that bullet to the hip in '71, I couldn't walk the beat anymore. But I've been just as happy here, watching justice be served. It makes me feel like there's some kind of karmic order to the world. Good deeds and bad deeds get repaid in kind. It was clear there was something lurking beneath his words, some unspoken thesis. Eventually, with old, wrinkled, tired eyes, he said it. I've thought about it, and if Glass doesn't die tonight, I'm finally going to retire, Mendez, he confessed. After what he did to those girls, what kind of order can there be in a world where a monster like that is just beyond justice? I was shocked. Warden Taft always struck me as an unmoving fixture. What would we do without him? He'll die, sir, I promised. It'll work this time, it has to. But he seemed deeply uncertain. With one last shuddering drink, he leaned forward. His eyes. He stared at my expression, as if desperate for me to understand, for me to know. Those things in his eyes, haven't you seen them? And at that moment, Taft was yanked up out of his chair. It was so sudden, so inexplicable, I could barely register what I was witnessing. Some unseen force lifted him 2 or 3 feet above the ground, dangling him there. He choked, coughed, and sputtered, desperate to gasp down air which would not come, and clawed at something around his neck which I could not see. He was hanging, I realized, and with wide, horrified eyes, the same as Billy's had been, he silently begged me for help. I sprang from my chair and wrapped my arms around his dangling legs. At first I tried to pull him down to the floor, but I realized it was only tightening the invisible noose around his neck. Then I tried lifting him as high as I could, which gave him some relief, but not much. Tears rolled down his face as it swelled and turned blue. And even though I could not see the noose, I could see the bruised purple skin where it had squeezed around his neck. All the while, I screamed myself hoarse. "Help! Somebody, please! Jesus Christ, we need help in here!" But nobody came. And all of a sudden, some unseen force seemed to sweep my feet out from under me. I dropped like a bag of bricks, but I was so startled I maintained my grip around the warden's legs. I fell and yanked him down with me, and his body suddenly jolted with a sickening crack. It took me a while to manage the courage to look up at him. His neck had been stretched far too long, and his head was bent to the side at almost a 90-degree angle. Eyes wide, round, and bloated tongue hanging from dry lips. And then whatever force had suspended him disappeared, and his body fell upon me while I screamed and screamed. I came bursting from his office to find my co-workers casually chatting and working just outside. Somehow, despite all my screaming and begging while Taft was dying, none of them had heard a thing. I took a page from Taft. I wanted out. We were dealing with something unholy here, something whose tendrils could reach any distance, and my life, who knows, maybe even my soul, was at hazard. But the agents in the sharp suits made one thing clear. If I refused to cooperate, well, I would make the perfect scapegoat for the murder of Warden Taft. I was marched into the interrogation room to find a Joseph Glass that had abandoned all pretense of humanity. His eyes had darkened to a pure black, or perhaps he had no eyes at all, only windows into some place of outer darkness. I was shaking like a leaf as I sat in front of him, feeling more like a prisoner than he was. Mr. Glass." No reply. I shuddered, trying to focus on my little piece of paper to distract myself from the blackness of his eyes. I have some questions I'm supposed to ask you. Is that okay?" Silence. I take a deep breath. "How old are you, Glass?" I thought it was just one of those basic questions. Conversation starters, really. I couldn't have prepared myself for his answer. "I am old, child." His voice was nothing like I remembered. It was deep and low and rumbling, like there were multiple people speaking in unison, and all were equally ancient. "Older than you could possibly know. Older than this nation, and older even than the empire that once bore it." I had to fight the basic animal instinct to flee. Focus on the questions, I thought. "Why did you do what you did to those girls?" "Just so I could feel something again," he whispered. "Anything." "Did you not feel the slightest bit of guilt? Remorse?" "You ask that of me? Me who has watched empires rise and fall." He almost sounded amused. "Does time feel remorse? For time has killed far more than I. But mankind is like the Hydra. All I've killed will be replaced by, essentially, identical stock, and in greater numbers. And then they will die and be replaced. And so the cycle will continue forever. Did you expect me to pity them for being given the death I myself covet? Only the dead are given leave of the cycle. It is a blessing." And suddenly, he stood from his chair, as if he'd never been restrained at all. "A blessing you promised me, Officer Mendez." I stared up at him in disbelief. "What? How did you—" But I couldn't even stammer a sentence out before he was upon me, crawling over the table with the eerie grace of a spider. These were no longer the imperceptible hints of emotions I'd come to expect. It was like a switch had been flipped. Tears streamed down his cheeks, snarling with genuine rage, hurt, betrayal. And beneath those black seas in his eyes, all the things that haunted the fathoms below were rising to the surface. You owe me a death. Make good on your word. Pay your debt. I cried out and recoiled from his every touch with disgust, but he was stronger than he looked. I couldn't worm my way out of his impossible grip. I won't. Get off of me, you sick bastard. Do it. Pay me what you owe. It was like 1,000 different voices screaming in my ear. Straining and weeping, I locked my hands around his neck and pressed my thumbs against his throat, trying to strangle him. But instead, I could just feel that grip upon my own neck, squeezing the life out of myself as my lungs burned for air. Yet I kept pressing harder and harder, as if hoping I might somehow break through whatever unholy force was protecting him. And then those terrible hands grasped my shoulders again, and I was paralyzed by a terror that could be called nothing but ancient and primal. Like the thing standing behind me was the same force that had kept my ancestors huddled terrified in their caves 100,000 years ago, and every one of those voices was crying out to me through my very blood, and it pulled me from my chair, threw me as though I were weightless, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the infirmary. Once more, none of this was captured on the security camera. In the footage, I just enter the room and have a seat with strange, almost robotic movements. And then the both us just sit there, staring at each other without speaking, without moving, without blinking, for an hour. After this, Joseph Glass entered a catatonic state, and from then on refused to converse with even me. Now that my usefulness had ended, the agents discarded me like yesterday's trash. Don't even seem to care if I tell anybody. Who would believe me? I thought I'd gotten lucky, that my nightmare was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Go sorting through any public records and you won't find a single mention of the name Joseph Glass. They've squirreled him away in that off-the-books black site and scrubbed away every other trace of him. I'd say he'd been unpersoned, if indeed he could ever be called a person at all. But they're still trying every execution method in the book. I don't know quite why. Maybe it's for research. I'm sure the US military would love to find the secret to making its men as unkillable as Glass. And besides, they're not the ones who have to deal with the consequences. On June 3rd, 2005, they tried a firing squad. I know this because me and my wife were out on our second honeymoon, slow dancing by the lake at night to our favorite song, when I felt a wetness against my chest. I looked down to see her eyes as gray and dull as foggy glass, and her chest shredded to Swiss cheese by rounds that made no sound. On December 23rd, 2012, they tried lethal injection. That was the day they found my son's car wrapped around a tree, and baffled coroners discovered that he was dead before the accident even occurred, his bloodstream polluted with pavilon and potassium chloride. It's been years since I've isolated myself from everyone I knew, hermiting away in this cabin out in the middle of nowhere. And yet the stench of death still follows me. Just a couple years ago, I found a news report mentioning my nephew. Apparently, he'd been found completely exsanguinated, his veins emptied utterly despite no signs of a struggle. God knows what kind of arcane methods of execution they're trying by now. He's not going to let me walk away from this. Not while I still owe him a debt. But I've been doing some research too. Research into those untold legions of things I witnessed staring up from that blackened sea in Glass's eyes. I've learned things men were not meant to know. Practiced rites, assembled tools, ingredients. And I think I know where they're keeping him. Even though they blindfolded me, I counted the second between every turn on our way to the black site, and I've since spent weeks watching the place, cataloging every entry point. Maybe I'm slipping into madness, or maybe I've truly found the way to put an end to the horror, to finally give this monster the justice that Taft would have wanted for him. Joseph Glass had been right about one single thing. I have to pay what I owe, even if it kills me. As far as missing persons go, I'd say about half the calls I get are related to that. The others are rescue calls, people who fall down cliffs and hurt themselves, get injured by fire. You wouldn't believe how often this happens, mostly drunk kids. Get bitten or stung by animals or insects. We're a tight team, and we have veterans who are excellent at finding signs of lost people. That's what makes these cases where we never find any trace of them so frustrating. One in particular was upsetting for all of us, because we did find a trace of them, but it just led to more questions than answers. An older man had been hiking alone on a well-established trail, but his wife called to say that he hadn't come home when he should have. Apparently he had a history of seizures, and she was worried that he hadn't taken his medication and had suffered one out on the trail. Before you ask, I have no idea why he thought it was okay to go out alone, or why she didn't go with him. I don't ask about that kind of thing because past a certain point it really doesn't matter. Someone is missing, and it's my job to find them. We went out in a standard search formation, and it wasn't long before one of our vets found signs that the guy had gone off the trail. We grouped up and followed him, spreading out in a fan to make sure we were covering as much ground as possible. Suddenly, a call comes over the radio telling us to all head back to the vet's location, and we come right away, because this usually means the missing person is injured, and we need a full team to help get them out safely. We meet back up, and the vet is just standing at the base of a tree with his hands on the sides of his head. I ask my buddy what's going on, and he points up into the branches of this tree. I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing, but there's a walking stick dangling from a branch at least 30 feet off the ground. The little strap thing on the handle has been looped around the branch, and it's just hanging there. There's no way the guy could have tossed it up that far, and we don't see any other signs that he's still in the area. We call up into the tree, but it's obvious no one's in it. We're all just sort of left scratching our heads. We keep searching for the guy, but we never find him. We even bring our canines out, but they lose his scent long before this tree. Eventually, the search is called off because there are other calls we have to attend to, and past a certain point, there's not much we can do. The guy's wife called us every day for months, asking if we'd found her husband, and it was heartbreaking to hear her get more and more hopeless each time. I'm not sure why this call in particular was so upsetting, but I think it was just the sheer improbability of it. That and the questions that were raised. How the hell had this guy's cane ended up there? Did someone kill him and toss that up there as some weird trophy? We did our best to find him, but it was almost like a taunt. We still talk about that one from time to time. One of my first jobs as a trainee was a search op for a 4-year-old kid that had gotten separated from his mom. This was one of those cases where we knew we were going to find him because the dogs were on a strong scent trail, and we saw clear signs that he was in the area. We ended up finding him in a berry patch about half a mile from where he'd been last seen. Kid wasn't even aware that he'd wandered that far. One of the vets brought him back, which I was glad for because I'm really not good with kids, and I find it hard to talk to them and keep them company. As my trainer and I are headed back, she decides to take me on a detour to show me one of the hot spots where we tend to find missing people. It's a natural dip in the land near a popular trail, and people will usually move downhill because it's easier. We hike out there, it's a few miles away, and we get there in about an hour or so. As we're walking around the area and she's pointing out places she's found people in the past, I see something in the distance. Now this area we're in is about 8 miles from the main parking area, though there's back roads you can take to get closer if you don't want to hike that far. But we're on state-protected land, which means there can't be any kind of commercial or residential development out here. The most you'll ever see is a fire tower or makeshift shelter that homeless people think they can get away with building. But I can see from here that whatever this thing is has straight edges, and if there's one thing you learn quickly, it's that nature rarely makes straight lines. I point it out, but she doesn't say anything. She just hangs back and lets me wander over and check it out. I get within about 20 feet of it, and all the hair on the back of my neck stands up. It's a staircase, in the middle of the fucking woods. In the proper context, it would literally be the most benign thing ever. It's just a normal staircase with beige carpet, and about 10 steps tall. But instead of being in a house where it obviously should be, it's out here in the middle of the woods. The sides aren't carpeted, obviously, and I can see the wood it's made of. It's almost like a video game glitch, where the house has failed to load completely and the stairs are the only thing visible. I stand there, and it's like my brain is working overtime to try and make sense of what I'm seeing. My trainer comes and stands next to me, and she just stands there casually, looking at it as if it's the least interesting thing in the world. I ask her what the fuck this thing is doing here, and she just chuckles. "Get used to it, rookie. You're gonna see a lot of them." I start to move closer, but she grabs my arm, hard. "I wouldn't do that," she says. Her voice is casual, but her grip is tight, and I just stand there looking at her. "You're gonna see them all the time, but don't go near them. Don't touch them. Don't go up them. Just ignore them." I start to ask her about it, but something in the way she's looking at me tells me that it's best if I don't. We end up moving on, and the subject doesn't come up again for the rest of my training. She was right, though. I'd say about every fifth call I go on, I end up running across a set of stairs. Sometimes they're relatively close to the path, maybe within 2 or 3 miles. Sometimes they're 20, 30 miles out, literally in the middle of nowhere, and I only find them during the broadest searches or training weekends. They're usually in good condition, but sometimes it looks like they've been out there for miles. All different kinds, all different sizes. The biggest I ever saw looked like they came out of a turn-of-the-century mansion and were at least 10 feet wide, with steps leading up at least 15 or 20 feet. I've tried talking about it with people, but they just give me the same response my trainer did. "It's normal. Don't worry about it. They're not a big deal, but don't go close to them or up them." When trainees ask me about it now, I give them the same response. I don't really know what else to tell them. I'm really hoping someday I get a better answer, but it hasn't happened yet. This is another one that was less spooky and more sad. A young man went missing late in winter, when realistically no one should be going that far out onto the trails. We close a lot of them, but some remain open year-round, unless there's a shitload of snow. We did an op for him, but we had about 6 feet of snow on the ground. It was an unusually heavy snow year, and we knew it wasn't likely that we'd find him until spring when the thaw came. Sure enough, when the first big thaw came, a hiker reported a body a little ways off the main trail. We found him at the base of a tree in a pile of melted snow. I knew right away what had happened, and it scared the living shit out of me. Most of you who ski or snowboard or spend any amount of time on a mountain will probably have guessed too. When snow falls, it doesn't collect as thick in the areas beneath the branches. It happens most with fir trees because they have a sort of closed umbrella shape. So what you end up with is a space around the base of a tree that's filled with a mixture of loose, powdery snow, air, and branches. They're called tree wells, and they're not immediately obvious if you don't know what you're looking for. We put up signs in the welcome center, big ones, letting people know how dangerous they are, but every year that we get an unusual amount of snow, at least one person doesn't read them, or doesn't take the warning seriously, and we find out about it in spring. My best guess is that this young man was hiking and got tired, or maybe a cramp from walking in the deep snow. He went to go sit at the base of the tree, not knowing that there was a tree well, and fell in. He got stuck with his feet up, and the surrounding snow caved in around him. Unable to free himself, he suffocated. It's called snow immersion suffocation, and it doesn't usually happen except in really deep snow. But if you get stuck in a weird position like this guy did, even 6 feet of snow can be lethal. What scared me the most was imagining how he must have struggled. Upside down, in the freezing cold, he didn't die quickly. The snow would have formed a dense, heavy pile on top of him, and it would have been literally impossible to get out. As it got harder to breathe, he would have known what was happening. I can't even imagine what he was thinking in his last moments. A lot of my less outdoorsy friends want to know if I've ever seen the goat man while I've been out on calls. Unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, I've never had anything quite like that happen. I guess the closest was the whole black-eyed man thing, but I didn't see anything. However, there was one call where I had something kind of similar happen, but I'm not sure I'm willing to chalk it up to the goat man. We'd gotten a report that an older woman had fainted along one of the trails and needed assistance getting back down to the main area. We hike up to where she's at, and her husband is just beside himself. He runs, well, I guess more jogs to us, and tells us that he was a little ways off the trail looking at something when his wife starts screaming behind him. He runs back to her and she's passed out on the trail. We get her on a backboard, and as we're getting her down to the welcome center, she comes to and starts screaming again. I calm her down and ask her what happened. I can't remember verbatim what she said, but essentially, what happened was this. She'd been waiting for her husband when she started hearing this really strange sound. She said it sounded sort of like a cat, but it was off somehow, and she couldn't quite figure out why. She went a little ahead to try and hear it better, and it sounded like it was coming closer. She said the closer it got, the more uneasy she was, until she finally figured out what was wrong. I do remember this next part, because it was so weird that I don't think I could forget it if I tried. It wasn't a cat, it was a man saying the word meow over and over. Just meow, meow, meow. But it wasn't a man. It couldn't have been, because I've never heard a man make his voice buzz like that. I thought my hearing aid was going out, but it wasn't. I adjusted it, and it still sounded all buzzy. It was awful. He was coming closer, but I couldn't see him. And the closer he got, the more scared I was. And the last thing I remember was a shape coming out of the trees. I guess that's when I fainted. Now, obviously, I'm a little perplexed as to why a guy would be out in the fucking woods chanting meow meow at people. So once we get down the mountain, I tell my superior that I'm gonna go search the area to see if I can find anything. He gives me the go-ahead, and I grab a radio and hike back to where she fainted. I don't see anyone, so I keep going about a mile more, and when I head back, I go off the trail to see if I can figure out where she saw him coming from. It's almost sunset by this point, and I don't have any desire to be out at night alone, so I just sort of write it off and make a mental note to check it out again tomorrow. But as I'm headed back, I start to hear something in the distance. I stop, and I call out for anyone in the immediate area to identify themselves. The sound didn't come closer or get louder, but it sounded exactly like a man saying, meow meow in this really odd monotone. As comical as it makes it sound, it was almost like that guy on South Park with the electrolarynx Ned. I go off the trail in the direction I think it's coming from, but I never seem to get closer. It's almost like it's coming from all directions. Eventually, it just sort of fades out, and I ended up going back to the Welcome Center. I didn't get any further reports like that, and even though I went back to that area, I never heard that exact sound again. I suppose it could have been some stupid kid out there fucking with people, but even I have to admit it was weird. The first happened on a case that I went out on right after I got out of training and was still pretty new to everything. Before I took this job, I was a volunteer, so I had a basic idea of what to expect. But on those calls, you're mostly dealing with finding lost people after vets have found signs of them. As an CR officer, you go out for all kinds of cases, from animal bites to heart attacks. This case got called in early in the morning, from a young couple who were up on one of the trails that goes by the lake. The husband was completely hysterical, and we couldn't really figure out what was going on. We could hear the woman screaming in the background, and he was begging us to come up there right away. When we get there, we see him holding his wife, and she's got something in her arms. She's screaming these awful, almost animal-like screams, and he's sobbing. He sees us and he screams at us to help them, to please get an ambulance up there. Now obviously we can't just drive an ambulance up the walking path, so we ask him if his wife needs help, or if she can walk on her own. He's still hysterical, but he manages to tell us that it's not his wife that needs help. I go over while one of the vets tries to calm him down, and I ask the wife what's going on. She's rocking, holding something, and just shrieking over and over. I crouch down and see that whatever she's holding, it's covering her with blood. That's when I notice the sling on her front, and my heart sinks. I ask her to tell me what's going on, and I sort of pry her arms gently open so I can see what she's holding. It's her baby, obviously dead. His head is caved in on one side and he's covered in scratches. Now, I've seen dead bodies before, but something about this whole situation hits me hard. I have to take a second to compose myself, and I get up and go get one of the other vets who's standing by. I tell him that it's a dead kid, and he sort of pats my shoulder and tells me he'll deal with it. It took us over an hour to get this woman to let us see her kid. Every time we try to take him from her, she flips out and tells us we can't have him, that he'll be okay if we just leave her alone and let her help him. But eventually, one of the vets manages to calm her down, and she gives us the body. We took it back to the med area, but when the EMTs showed up, they told us that there was never any hope of saving the kid. He died instantly from the trauma to his head. I was good buddies with one of the nurses who met them at the hospital, and she told me later what had happened. Turns out the couple had been walking with the baby in the sling, and they stopped because the kid was fussing. The dad takes the kid and is holding him, looking out over this little gully by the path. The mom comes to stand next to him, but she ends up stepping on a loose patch of soil and she trips. She falls into the dad, who drops the kid, who ends up falling about 20 feet down this little gully onto the rocks at the bottom. The dad climbed down and recovered the kid, but he'd fallen right on his head and was dead by the time he got there. The baby was only about 15 months old. It was a total freak accident, a series of events that coalesced into the worst possible outcome. Probably one of the more awful calls I've been on. I haven't seen a lot of animal bites in my time as an SAR officer, mostly because there aren't that many animals that come around the area. While there are bears in the area, they tend to stay pretty far away from people, and sightings are highly unusual. Most of the animals you'll see are small ones, like coyotes, raccoons, or skunks. What we do see frequently, though, are moose. And let me tell you, moose are nasty fuckers. They'll chase after anything for any reason, and God help you if you get in between a female and its baby. One of the more amusing calls was of a guy who'd gotten chased down by an absolutely massive male moose and was stuck up a tree. Took us almost an hour to get him down, and when he was finally on solid ground again, he looks at me and says, "God damn, them fuckers is big up close." I guess that's not really a scary story, but we still laugh about that one. Running. It's the only time I've ever lost my composure like that, but something about it was so incredibly wrong, and neither of us wanted to stay out there anymore. When we got back to the rendezvous, we asked if anyone else had heard anything strange, but no one else knew what we were talking about. I know it sounds sort of anticlimactic, but that call fucked me up for a long time. As for the little girl, we never found a trace of her. We keep an eye out for her and all the other people who we've never found. But frankly, I doubt we'll ever find anything. Of the missing persons calls I've gone out on, only a handful have ever resulted in a complete disappearance, meaning no trace of the person and no body ever found. But sometimes, finding a body just leads to more questions than answers. Here are some of the bodies we've found that have become infamous in our team. A teenage boy whose remains were recovered almost a year after he vanished. We found the top of his skull, 2 finger bones, and his camera almost 40 miles from where he was last seen. The camera, sadly, was destroyed. The pelvis of an older man who had vanished a month earlier. That was all we found. The lower jaw and right foot of a 2-year-old boy on the highest peak of a ridge in the southern part of the park. The body of a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome, almost 20 miles from where she'd vanished. She had died of exposure 3 weeks after going missing, and all of her clothes were intact except for her shoes and jacket. There were berries and cooked meat in her stomach when they did the autopsy. The coroner said it appeared as if someone had been taking care of her. There were no suspects ever identified. The frozen body of a 1-year-old baby, found a week after vanishing in the hollow trunk of a tree 10 miles from the area he was seen last. There was fresh milk found in his stomach, but his tongue was gone. A single vertebra and right kneecap of a 3-year-old girl, found in the snow almost 20 miles from the campground her family had been at the previous summer. Now on to a couple of the stories my friend told me. I mentioned that you were all interested in the stairs and you're in luck. He's had a closer encounter with them. Though he doesn't have any explanation for them, he does have a bit more experience with them than I do. My buddy has been an SAR officer for about 7 years. He started when he was a junior in college, and he had a very similar experience when he first encountered the stairs. His trainer told him almost the same thing mine did, which was to never go near, touch, or ascend them. For the first year, he did just that, but apparently his curiosity got the better of him. and on one call he broke away from the line and went to go check a set of them out. He said they were about 10 miles from the path where a teenage girl had vanished, and the dogs were following a scent. He was on his own, lagging behind the main group, when he saw a set of stairs off to his left. They looked like they were from a new house because the carpeting was pristine and white. He said that as he got closer, he didn't feel any different or hear any weird noises. He was expecting something to happen, like bleeding from his ears or collapsing, but he got right up next to them and didn't feel anything. The only thing, he said, that was odd was that there was absolutely no debris on the steps, no dirt, leaves, dust, anything, and there didn't appear to be any signs of animal or insect activity in the immediate area, which he found strange. It was less like things were avoiding them, and more like they just happened to be in a relatively barren part of the forest. He touched the stairs and didn't feel anything except that sort of sticky feeling you get from new carpet. Making sure his radio was on, he slowly climbed the stairs. He said it was terrifying, because the way they'd been stigmatized, he wasn't really sure what was going to happen to him. He joked that half of him expected to be teleported to some other dimension, and the other half was watching for a UFO to come swooping down. But he got to the top with little event, and he stood there looking around. But, he said, the longer he stood on the top step, the more he felt like he was doing something very, very wrong. He described it as the feeling you'd get if you were in a part of a government building you have no business being in, as if someone was going to come and arrest you or shoot you in the back of the head at any second. He tried to brush it off, but the feeling got stronger and stronger, and that's when he realized that he couldn't hear anything anymore. The sounds of the forest were gone, and he couldn't hear his own breathing. It was like some kind of weird, awful tinnitus, but more oppressive. He climbed back down and rejoined the search and didn't mention what he'd done. But, he said, the weirdest part came after. His trainer was waiting back at the welcome center after the search ended for the day, and he cornered my buddy before he could leave. He said his trainer had this look of intense anger, and he asked what was wrong. "You went up them, didn't you?" My buddy said it wasn't phrased as a question. He asked how his trainer knew. The trainer just shook his head. "Because we didn't find her. The dogs lost her scent." My buddy asked what that had to do with anything. The trainer asked how long he'd been on the stairs, and my buddy said no more than a minute. The trainer gave him this really awful, almost dead-eyed look, and told him that if he ever went up another set of stairs again, he'd be fired, immediately. The trainer walked away, and I guess he's never answered any of the questions my buddy has asked him about it since. My buddy has been involved in a lot of missing persons cases where there's never been a trace of them found. I mentioned David Paulides, and my buddy said he can confirm that those stories are, for the most part, accurate. He said that most of the time, if the person isn't found right away, they're either never found, or they're found weeks, months, or years later in places they can't possibly have gotten to. One story he told me really stood out that involved a 5-year-old boy with a severe mental disability. The little boy vanished from a picnic area in the late fall. In addition to the mental disability, he was also physically handicapped, and his parents explained over and over that he simply could not have vanished. It was impossible. Someone had to have taken him. My buddy said they searched for this kid for weeks, going miles out of the accepted range, but it was like he'd never been there. The dogs couldn't pick up his scent anywhere, not even in the picnic area where he'd apparently vanished from. Suspicion fell on the parents, but it was pretty clear that they were devastated and hadn't done anything sinister to their kid. The search was concluded about a month later, and my buddy said everyone had pretty much forgotten it by later in the winter. He was out on a training op in the snow, on one of the higher peaks, when he came across something in the snow. He said he saw it from far away at first, and when he got closer, he realized it was a shirt, frozen and sticking part way out of the powder. He recognized it as belonging to the kid, because it had a distinctive pattern. About 20 yards away, he found the kid's body, laying partially buried in the snow. My buddy said there was no way the kid had been dead for any more than a few days, even though he'd been missing for almost 3 months. The kid was curled around something, and when my buddy brushed off the snow to see what it was, he said he almost couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a big chunk of ice, that had been carved crudely to look sort of like a person. The kid was holding it so tight that it had frostbitten his chest and hands, which my buddy could tell even with the decay that had taken place. He radioed the rest of the crew and they took the body off the mountain. Now, he recapped all of this for me, and to put it simply, there was no way this kid could have both survived for almost 3 months on his own or have gotten to this peak. There was no physical way this child could have walked almost 50 miles and ended up on the top of a goddamn mountain. To top it off, there was nothing in the kid's stomach or colon. Nothing. Not even water. It was like my buddy said, the kid had been taken off the face of the earth, put in suspended animation, and dropped on this mountain months later, only to die of exposure. He's never really gotten over that one. The last story I'll share from him was one that took place relatively recently, only a few months ago. They were out doing a recon for mountain lions because there had been several reports of sightings in the last couple of days. One of our jobs is to scout out the areas where these animals are seen to ensure that if they are in the area, we can warn people and close off those trails. He was out on his own in a very heavily forested part of the park toward dusk when he heard what sounded like a woman screaming in the distance. Now, as most of you know, when a mountain lion screams, it sounds almost exactly like a woman being brutally murdered. It's unsettling, but far from abnormal. My buddy radioed back and let ops know that he'd heard one and that he was going to keep going to see if he could figure out where its territory started. He heard the mountain lion scream a couple more times, always from the same spot, and determined the approximate area of the mountain lion's territory. He was about to head back when he heard another scream, this time within only a few yards of him. Of course, he freaks out and starts heading back at a much faster pace, because the last thing he wants is to run into a goddamn mountain lion and get mauled to death. As he got back on the path and started heading back, the screaming followed him, and he broke into a jog. When he was about a mile from ops, the screaming stopped, and he turned around to see if it was following him. It was almost night by this point, but he said in the distance, just before the path rounded a corner, he could see what looked like a male figure. He called out to them, warning them that the paths were closed and that he needed to come back to the welcome center. The figure just stood there, and my buddy started to walk over. When he was about 10 yards away, the figure took, as he described, an impossibly long step toward him and let out the same scream my buddy had been hearing. My buddy didn't even say anything. He just turned and sprinted back to ops, never looking behind him. By the time he got back, the screaming had moved back into the woods. He didn't mention it to anyone else, just said that there was a mountain lion in the area and that they would need to close those paths until the animal could be located and moved.